Me,
Here.
Fran Pavley, Catherine Phillips.
Here.
All right, we do have a quorum. And then from the Legislative Advisory staff, Caitlin Peterson, Catherine Moore, Katarina Robinson, Keith Chalino,
Here.
Natalie Turan, and Candace Cotton. So some of the Legislative Advisory members, staffers they're pretty busy right now, so
Yeah.
thank you for being here. And Catherine Moore was going to be on the phone, and I don't know, we do have it virtually as well, so some public members will probably be participating via the internet, as well as some board members. So with that, Mr. Chair, we do have a quorum.
Great. So that takes us through the roll call, agenda item 1. John, I think we do public forum for items not on this agenda.
We do.
And just for everyone's kind of situational awareness, the board does have a closed session item. John described how we'll do that, but also this afternoon is a celebration because somebody's having a birthday.
Right.
Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, this year, the Wildlife Conservation Board turned 75 years old. So we are having a celebration later this afternoon to celebrate the work of the Wildlife Conservation Board over the last 75 years. I think it's going to be fun. It's going to be full of information. We're going to be able to see a lot of old friends and partners that we haven't seen for a while that will be there. So looking forward to having that. And it is from 2 to 4 today. And if you can make it, that's great. And looking forward to having it.
So I mentioned that in part because this board does not typically put time limits on public comment. We really encourage the conversation, but this day we'd ask each of you to just keep in mind that we all are getting over to an event across town by about 2 o'clock. I think we should have plenty of time. And I say this as we head into public forum for items not on this agenda. So if you have an item that relates to the board, but it's not on this agenda, now is the moment. And I think virtually, we're probably managing a raise hand function and we have speaker cards in the room. John, over to
Correct.
you.
That's correct. So thank you, Chuck. So is there any members in the audience here that would like to address the board on items that are not in the agenda today? So seeing none, Celeste, do we have any folks on the online that wishes to address the board for items not on the agenda today?
Yes, we have Kathy Knight.
Right.
She should be able to unmute herself now.
Great.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, Kathy Knight. I'm with the Biona Ecosystem Education Project, and we've been volunteering 30 years now to save the Biona wetlands here in the Los Angeles area. It's a very special place, and it's mostly a freshwater wetland on the coast. And I would just like to ask you, in the future, if there's any help to get us, help us get funding to do a study of a hydrology study of this wetland. There's actually never really been a hydrology study done. And we want to study the relationship between the surface and groundwater interface. So we're looking for that to get a wetland study, a hydrology study done. And if there's any way you can help us find where to apply for that or get that funding, we would appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kathy.
Kathy, I think what we can do on that item is just have staff maybe connect with you for like an informational email about the different connection points with the board's funding programs.
Right, yeah, and I'd just like to add as well, you can, we do have a new process at Wildlife Conservation Board that we kicked off earlier this year to accept application and review projects. There's a pre-application process, and that form and information about the process can be found on our website. So feel free to do that, Ms. Knight, and then also just reach out to staff as well. Be happy to address any questions. And that goes for anybody, members of the public who wishing to look for funding from the Wildlife Conservation Board or participation by the WCB. Feel free to reach out to us at any time.
Thank you.
Any other, Celeste?
The next would be Margot Griswold.
Good morning, Wildlife Conservation Board members and staff, and happy birthday. I didn't realize. But I would like to introduce myself. I'm a restoration ecologist, actually work on some of the funded projects from the Wildlife Conservation Board in the state. And I want to echo Kathy Knight's request. The Ballona, I'm a restoration ecologist, and so when I look at the Ballona Wetlands Ecological Reserve and I look at the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's current plan, which is to lower the wetland below current sea level and to change the Ballona Wetlands Ecological Reserve from a terrestrial to a marine reserve, not what it was intended, not what it is described in code. I am amazed that there has never been a land management plan implemented for the Ballona Wetlands Ecological Reserve to guide management of the reserve. And that type of management may include a restoration plan. But without such a plan, how can you jump to that conclusion? And yet, the Department of Fish and Wildlife is going on with a plan without having a land management plan that every other ecological reserve in California has. So I find that we need to ask the Wildlife Conservation Board as the public to apply for the money to then move forward and hire independent persons to conduct such a study. It's very important. Already in the study of the groundwater sustainability plan for the Santa Monica subbasin, it has been identified that the Ballona Wetlands Ecological Reserve is a groundwater dependent ecosystem. We may argue about how much of that is groundwater dependent, but that's where an LMP would study the situation. There's never been a study for the current plan that looks at the level of groundwater across the site, nor the connection between the seasonal surface water and the groundwater and the habitats that are currently exist and could potentially be rehabilitated. I'm sure it's not an irony lost on the Wildlife Conservation Board that the California Department of Fish and Wildlife has proposed a plan for a wetland without conducting groundwater or surface water hydrology studies. They're not following their own protocol. That's why we're asking the board for help. And I've written it down that there's a pre-application form and we will reach out to staff because I think the board has in 2019 allotted money for a land management plan for the Ballona wetlands, but only includes archaeology. And don't get me wrong, it's incredibly important at the Ballona wetlands because it's been registered as a sacred site by the Tongva. So that should move forward, but we haven't seen any results from that land management plan, but it's only a piece of what should be done for the Ballona Wetlands Ecological Reserve. And so I just am giving you this as information, and then I'll move forward with other interested public stakeholders to try and get money for the land management plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Griswold. And look, I appreciate your passion for the reserve. Like you, I'm pretty familiar with all the points of agreement and disagreement. And for this board, I just encourage you to approach staff who's available for any person or entity that may eventually wish to submit an application to the board.
Thank you.
Right, any other members of the public? Celeste?
We have about 5 more with raised hands. The next would be Roger Sternberg.
Go ahead, Roger.
Roger, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I just did, and I mistakenly raised my hand, so I apologize. I'll, if there are any questions about the Rice Ranch project, I'll be available to answer them.
Great.
Thank you.
So just look for that agenda item when we get there. Thank you.
Thank you.
So just call the next, Alexa, please.
The next would be Gregory Matsumoto. You should be able to unmute yourself now.
My apologies. I clicked that hand by error. No comment. Thank you for your
Yep,
attention.
so anyone else in the queue, just a quick reminder, items not on the agenda. And if you want to comment on an agenda item, we'll make sure you get that moment on that agenda item. So we'll give it a second, see if hands drop down on the Zoom. And if not, could you call the next speaker, please?
The next would be Nick Jocelyn. You should be able to unmute yourself now.
Hi, this is Nick Joslin from Mount Shasta Bioregional Ecology Center and Friends of the Shasta. First of all, I'd like to say happy birthday. You guys have done a lot of excellent work and the future looks bright for continuing to fund really great projects. Over the weekend, the Shasta River dropped into the teens. Shasta River Water Association, who has benefited from federal money, turned their back on the funders and flaunted the regulations, the emergency drought regulations. They dropped the river to near single digits and held it there for days. The point of that little background is to suggest the Wildlife Conservation Board, who is targeted to fund irrigation projects, has an opportunity to get more from project proponents with their taxpayer money. We've come to you several times to suggest there needs to be greater due diligence when entities whose primary function is to remove stream flow target funds that are designed to enhance stream flow. There need to be clauses in the contract that explicitly spell out penalties for unlawful activity or clauses that force repayment when regulations are not followed. An excellent example that also happened over the weekend was with the Klamath project, where water deliveries were cut off. An Oregon irrigation district refused to curtail, and the Bureau of Reclamation threatened to withhold drought funding, which rapidly brought the irrigation district into compliance. Permissive 1707s are not a good way to spend money. Since the water right holder can simply decide not to dedicate water, then they can also seek and receive additional money from groups like Cal Trout or Nature Conservancy to dedicate water. This double dipping costs too much. It guarantees nothing in the long term, and it simply creates financial incentives for dishonest practices and dishonest projects. I'd like to thank you guys again for entertaining the discussions we've had with staff regarding some of these issues, and can't state the importance of developing criteria which will help prevent cases in the future regarding funding in the Shasta River. Thank you for your time.
Great. Nick, thank you for coming to the board. Hang on one second, make sure we don't have a hang tight, everyone. I think that's just it's just a test. So take a break. So the system works. I assume if it were real, we'd be told what to do, but it does say test in the big bold letters. So if your phone, I think you just click on the alert and then noise goes off. Nick, we appreciate your presence in front of the board. My recollection of our last meeting is the board agreed to, identify for further discussion before taking granting action, the ability to be responsive to the issues you're raising.
Right, and staff is currently working.
And then I'll just confirm, look, I'm aware of the situation. The department has a regulatory and enforcement space. We're engaged with our sister and federal agencies who also have enforcement powers, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Next speaker, if there are any.
The next would be Patricia McPherson.
Hi, this is Patricia McPherson. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Hi, thank you for having me. Happy birthday, Patricia McPherson, Grassroots Coalition. And I'm aware of all of the wonderful projects you have listed today for your agenda. My concern is that these monies have follow through with how they are promised to the public and as to how they are actually spent. I would like to echo what was stated by Dr. Griswold as well as Kathy Knight. And also our request to be able to present to the board the situation that is ongoing at Baiona, as well as ask for help from you in an LMP study, which, as Dr. Griswold said, in 2019, one was approved by this board and it has not occurred. Perhaps that could be used as an action item for us to start addressing these issues. We have a lack of hydrology studies having been done at Baiona, and LMP would address those and would have addressed those issues and was required under Fish and Game Code 1019 shortly after it was acquired. And thanks to you, we had $140 million spent to acquire Baiona, and the Fish and Game Commission in 2005 then registered it as a Title 14, Section 630 non-marine terrestrial ecological reserve. The purpose of acquisition was for protecting its freshwater resources, its salt marsh, which does not mean full title, and the dependent endangered species and the wildlife corridors. We have been engaged with the Department of Water Resources under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and Baiona has been now acknowledged as a groundwater dependent ecosystem. Yet no groundwater evaluation has been done for Baiona. And that is what we are concerned with. It is very important to understand the surface groundwater interface at Baiona. Grassroots Coalition, my organization, was engaged in a lawsuit against the developer that is adjacent and CDFW, who were party to draining the wetlands, which coastal enforcement said they didn't know of a worse violation against a wetland than draining it. We prevailed in that lawsuit. Those drains have now been capped, and the pickleweed, which was the target species, marsh species for the site's acquisition, is now regenerating on its own in a passive situation, which is also foraging and nesting habitat for the endangered Belding Savannah sparrow, which is also what was targeted for Baiona in particular.
Ms. McPherson, if we could ask you to wrap up, I think the board, or at least would
Sure,
be
I
the-
just have one more point that I'm trying to wrap around what was already said so I don't repeat, but I just wanted to bring to your attention the exigency of this situation, because CDFW is moving ahead with trying to get permitting for excavating Baiona and bringing in salt water into an area that is a freshwater habitat area with 3 underlying freshwater aquifers that are classified by the Water Board as drinking water and potential drinking water. This all being done without a land management plan, without a hydrology evaluation. And even the land manager, Mr. Brody, has acknowledged their lack of information regarding the freshwater hydrology of the area. So we are, as I said last time, trying to get water back to Baiona that is still being diverted, and the NPDES permit, I had said to you, we have gotten back from the Water Board, so that water is now going to Baiona and not being wasted.
Ms. McPherson, I think we have the same answer to the, please engage with the board staff to identify possible application processes, and I appreciate your input.
Thank you for that. And I would just hope that that process would then also engage before any actual excavation of Biona would occur by the department. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you.
Any more, Alexa?
Yes, the next speaker is Pam Nelson. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Pam Nelson, Chair of the Santa Margarita Group of the Sierra Club. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, good. I'm here to ask you to seriously consider an application from the Friends of the San Jacinto Wildlife Area that you have just received, I think. This involves the acceptance of an over 2,000 acre donation of parcels adjacent to the wildlife area to mitigate for the construction of a World Logistics Center's warehouse on the north end. We first learned about this proposal at a meeting of the MSHCP Stakeholders Committee several months ago. It's important that the wildlife area acquire these parcels for several reasons. One, to protect from more warehouses coming in that same area, and to protect the multitude of endangered species that depend on this area. And also the wildlife connectivity for the basin. And there's a possible site for education of the public to conduct research and monitor the area with the addition of the horse ranch parcel. So the San Jacinto Basin is a candidate for the perfect candidate for the 30/30 initiative and deserves focused and innovative actions to sustain its wildlife value. So that's it.
Thank you.
Great,
Ms.
thank you.
Nelson.
Next.
The last one is Doug Johnson. You should be able to unmute yourself now.
Thank you, and good morning. Thanks for the opportunity for public input. My name is Doug Johnson. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit organization, the California Invasive Plant Council. Our work is to provide resources for the community of land stewards in California, whose work includes removal of invasive plants. And 2 times, most recently last year, the California Department of Pesticide Regulation has presented us with awards as IPM innovators for our contributions to integrated pest management. I'm here to say a few things about projects that include work to remove invasive plants. First, habitat restoration work does frequently require removing invasive plants. Secondly, we support a robust IPM, integrated pest management approach in which prevention and early detection of new invasive plant problems are prioritized. Thirdly, the IPM toolbox for removing invasive plants when management is required has many important tools that can be combined to be most effective and least ecologically harmful in a given situation. Herbicides are one of the most important tools in removing invasive plants. As an environmentalist, I know that it can be counterintuitive to understand that there are instances where an herbicide application could be not only more effective than alternatives, but also less ecologically harmful than alternatives. There's a lot of attention currently on the potential risks of glyphosate, especially through agricultural uses on our food. And this attention is a good thing. As a science-based organization, we believe that science should prevail over ideology in the examination of this issue. We work with universities and agencies to constantly improve IPM approaches for wildland weed management. So in short, I'm here to say that our organization supports the appropriate use of herbicides for removing invasive plants as a safe and effective practice in restoration projects and land stewardship. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. That's the last one. Alexa?
That's correct.
Great, thank you. All right, that takes us to item number 3 in the agenda. I just want to say thanks again for the public comment. It's always great. And I think in this virtual world, we are seeing a lot more public comment, but we welcome that and encourage folks that if you want to address the board, please do so. So with that, moving on to item number 3, which is a funding status update for the board and the public. This provides an overview of the current funding that's available to the Wildlife Conservation Board for projects around the state. It's updated as of July 1st when the new 22-23 budget was passed, and it includes a significant amount of general fund money this time for WCB. And I'll just briefly explain what those general fund monies, how they were allocated in the budget. There was a $221 million specifically for climate change impacts, which include drought impacts on fish and wildlife, dam removal and projects related to removal of dams, wildlife corridors, and fish passage. There was an additional $150 million for under the water resilience package, and that's for enhanced stream flows, floodplain restoration type projects, and those kinds of things. So with that, our current general fund balance is about $540 million, of which we will be looking for projects over the next couple of years to spend that funding down. The other funding includes a Habitat Conservation Fund, as well as bond funds that are currently available to the WCB. You'll notice that Proposition 12 is no longer in our funding status. Proposition 12 expired, I believe, June 30th. So, and we had very little money left in Proposition 1. I think there was less than $1 million in Proposition 12. So we did a great job of expending those funds on great projects around the state. So with that, I'll answer any questions that the board has on the funding status.
Anyone, questions? And I think it's also the case, in the coming literal days, the board will probably have at a staff level a handle on, how its go forward may be affected as final legislative and budget items are completed.
Yeah.
Actually,
There still is one more budget item anticipated, isn't there, before the end of this session?
Yeah, there was a proposal that came out in the governor's May revise for an additional climate and resiliency and natural working lands type funding for WCB. That funding is currently being worked through the committee process. And hopefully by the end of the legislature recesses, the end of this month, middle of next week, we should have an idea of what resulted through that committee process negotiation.
Good.
Just quick question. I know the administration is working on its 30 by 30 priorities, and they're kicking off sort of their approach. Have there been any conversations about sort of how that is broken up within the WCB's funding?
Yeah, we consistently regularly meet with the Natural Resources Agency staff. We have participated in 30 by 30 panels. We're going to be continuing to participate in those public panels over the next month or two to kind of line out the 30 by 30 goals and objectives for WCB, as well as the funding that we have and can be used for those kinds of purposes. And then if you noticed in our agenda as well, starting last board meeting, we do identify where projects align with the 30 by 30 goals. So we do identify that in our agenda as well.
I see the board as a major implementer, Damon. You don't exactly know with foresight which project may come into the process to implement, what landscape objective, but I think the conservancies and then the board are implementers for sure.
And I think that's one reason why we changed our application process. The board it's really our way of cutting the green tape for WCB and allowing that application process to be a continuous reoccurring process. And it allows staff to work with potential partners to actually develop better projects, be more timely on projects, and then implement those projects more effectively on the ground. So that's kind of what the backing is of our new application process as well.
Cool.
All right, that moves us on to item number 4 in the agenda, which is the recovery of funds, which is part of, these are projects that have been completed by the Wildlife Conservation Board. And what we do is we actually close the books on each individual project, and the remaining balances that remain for projects which the board allocated funds for go back into the pot from which they came. And this is a reflection of what the recoveries will be for this month or for this quarter. Any questions on that? All right, and I think that takes us into the consent calendar, which is items 5, or actually 4, it was included the recovery of funds, but items 5 through 14. And I do have one comment on item number 7, and we can do this in 2 ways, and it's at the board's pleasure. There is a change to the budget on that particular item, and I can either read the changes to the budget in here, or I can have staff present the item, and then we can vote on it as a presentation item.
Any preference,
preference?
board members?
Yeah, okay, and the change comes about from the increase in costs associated with the project. And they're minimal, but nonetheless, they're a change. And if I could read those into the record,
And then move it as
and
consent.
then move it as a consent item.
Which I'll just, for the public, this is occurring regularly as projects are proposed. And then when you think about the global supply chain and other bid processes, we're seeing, modest cost increases responsive to that global situation.
Okay, so for item number 7, the McLaughlin Reserve Fire Safety Improvement Project with the University of California at Davis. So the budget should read, right now, the budget says the project tasks, they list, and then the WCB total amount is 385,000. That is increasing to 313,500. The non-WCB funds go from 95,132 to 104,556. So the total cost would go from 380,132 to 418,056. So with that, I would entertain a motion on the consent calendar.
So accepting the minor budget adjustment for agenda item 7, we have a motion to approve the consent items. I'll second. We do the roll call.
Actually, we don't have to do it.
We don't
There's
have
no-
to roll call.
Yeah, we don't have to do, as long as that's
Okay.
consent, right, Colin? Yeah, because there's no board member online.
Okay.
So all in favor?
Aye.
Great, motion passes. Okay, that takes us to item 15 in the
So as a
agenda.
reminder, what'll happen is you'll see on the screen and those in the room, you'll get a quick presentation from staff. If this is the agenda item you'd like to speak on as a public commenter, fill out your speaker card if you're here. I think this is the raise hand function online. And then we'll call for public comment. Along the way, we'll have board questions, if any, discussion, and move for approval or.
Right.
Great.
Great. And so item number 15, that's been withdrawn in this agenda, so we will be bringing it back. So we'll move on to item number 16, the South Fork Lost River Flow Enhancement Project. Alyssa Purcell on our staff will present you the project. Alyssa.
This project is to consider the allocation for a grant to Sanctuary Forest to restore riparian habitat and improve dry season stream flow to support salmonids in the South Fork Lost River, a tributary to the Mattole River. Design and CEQA compliance were supported by a previous WCB planning grant. Next slide, please. The Lost River is a high priority tributary for coho recovery. Due to its coastal Mediterranean climate, summer flows in the Mattole watershed are sustained by groundwater rather than snowpack. However, climate change has resulted in longer dry seasons and land use impacts have further diminished groundwater storage. Under current conditions, groundwater levels at the project site can drop to 14 feet below ground surface by early May. In drought years, summer stream flows are not sufficient to support rearing, and coho had to be rescued from isolated pools in 2015, 2018, and 2020. Next slide, please. Based on lessons learned from past projects in the Mattole headwaters, this project utilizes 2 complementary strategies: groundwater storage and flow augmentation. The groundwater storage will be increased through construction of a stage 0 wetland, a terrace pond, and in-stream weirs along a 400-foot reach of the channel. These features will include subsurface clay barriers designed to slow the drainage to deep groundwater and maintain the connection to surface flow. In addition, the terrace pond will provide late season flow augmentation by releasing metered flow to the creek between August and October. And next slide, please. And so this is a photo of a terrace pond at Baker Creek that was completed in 2020. And Sanctuary Forest was able to use this as a pilot project to evaluate methods for stream flow enhancement and inform future actions. The use of subsurface barriers in this project was effective at improving and maintaining surface flows in June and July. However, some disconnection still occurred by late summer and fall. So based on these results, the South Fork Lost River project was designed with this two-pronged approach and the added flow augmentation component in order to keep pools connected longer and give rearing coho the best chance of surviving the dry season. Staff recommends the WCB adopt the written findings and approve the project as proposed. Tasha McKee McCorkle is here today from Sanctuary Forest to answer any of your questions.
Thank you, Alyssa. Right, any board member questions?
I would just note the visual of the logs there. Eventually, the nature Swiss Army knife beaver may be how California creates this or recreates this kind of natural condition.
All right, any members of the public? We do have one speaker card for this project. Tasha Key.
Thank you, Tasha.
Thank you. Any other members of the public wishing to speak? Anybody online, Celeste?
No hands raised.
Great.
Yes.
Yeah, so if folks didn't hear that, if you do wish to speak and you're in the audience, please come up to the podium because this is being recorded and we can catch the audio efficiently.
So Tasha had great remarks. That's the audio recording for posterity's sake. Seeing no other questions, would someone like to make a motion to approve agenda item 16?
Are we gonna approve with them one by one, or we're just gonna do one motion at the end?
Yeah, one by one. Since
One by
we're
one.
here, we don't have to take a vote.
Okay, I'll so move.
Second. I'm sorry.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you. Moving on to item number 17. This is to consider the Ellis Ranch Conservation Easement Project. Candace, she's online today and she will be presenting, Candace Marg of our staff will be presenting the project to you. Candace?
Good morning, everybody. The property is located in a remote area of southwestern Nevada County, situated southeast of the approximate 12,000 acre Spencerville Wildlife Area, east of Beale Air Force Base, and about 10 miles southwest of Penn Valley Community and State Highway 20. Next slide, please. The property is within the Spencerville Conceptual Area Protection Plan and is adjacent to an existing conservation easement that covers 560 acres to the north that is contiguous with the Spencerville Wildlife Area. Next slide, please. This large block of protected land provides for climate change adaptation and resiliency benefits within the Blue Oak Woodlands belt of the Sierra Nevada foothills. Next slide, please. The property is made up of 13 assessor parcel numbers totaling approximately 806 acres of generally hilly terrain with valleys, meadows, and ridgelines and elevations that range from 575 feet to 1,046 feet. The property consists of blue oak woodlands, wetlands, lacustrine, and grassland habitats and is currently used as rangeland. Next slide, please. There are 11 reservoirs, including 10 ponds and one 17-acre lake, all with extensive associated wetland habitat that are located on the property. Target species for conservation on the property include the foothill yellow-legged frog, tricolored blackbird, bald eagle, California black rail, yellow warbler, yellow-breasted chat, and ringtail. Next slide, please. Wildlife in this region depend on high-quality riparian habitat and healthy mature blue oak woodlands for migration and residency. Wildlife that requires large areas for their survival, such as the mountain lion, gray wolf, mule deer, and black bear, are dependent on strategic protections of land such as this property that support their lifestyle cycles and nutritional needs. Next slide, please. Bear Yuba Land Trust will manage the property and currently holds conservation easements on 10,000 acres of similar land in the area. Bear Yuba Land Trust will conduct annual monitoring and provide reports to WCB, who will also have access to conduct on-site inspections. Next slide, please. The property was appraised and approved by DGS as having a fair market value of $1,690,000. The property owners have agreed to sell the property for a bargain sale price of $1,289,600, which is $400,400 less than the appraised fair market value. Staff recommends approval of this project as proposed. And in the audience to help answer any questions is Aaron Tarr, the Executive Director of Bear Yuba Land Trust, and Brett Ellis, the landowner.
Great, thank you, Candace. Is there any board member questions?
I have one. I'm just curious, we've had other projects come before us where there have been problems with cattle having access to ponds and the effect that has on amphibians and other pond life. Will there be, I see there's lots of ponds and lots of cattle. Will there still be unlimited access to the ponds by the cattle, or will this easement start addressing that?
So the cattle are not excluded from any of the ponds or the riparian areas, but they are also not on the grounds year round. They're seasonally, which allows the ranch time to recover and rejuvenate. And the ranch is also very large with a lot of available water, so individual ponds don't get heavily impacted with use. I can have Aaron Tarr help address if there's any further questions on this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Aaron to come up too and just to go into it a little more.
Yeah, I was just also curious because aside from, the pond issue, one of the consequences of having cattle near ponds is that you often find squash frogs. And if the point of doing this is to protect the frogs, how are you going to make sure you don't end up with some casualties?
Hi, I'm Erin Tarr, Executive Director of the Bear Yuba Land Trust. Really appreciate you all considering this project. And this is a question that we consider as well when we're looking at properties. With this property, grazing has been a use here for over 150 years. The species are doing quite well. Like you noted, there are many reservoirs and many different ponds in this area. So we don't really see a lot of compaction of certain areas. They have a lot of room to spread out. And since it's seasonal grazing, they're there during the wet season. So their needs for water are less because there's water in the grasses and things like that as well. So while there's no exclusionary fencing or anything suggested, we also don't think that it will have an impact on the wildlife in that way. Thank you.
Actually, while you're here, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
So monitoring and enforcing the easement is something that your organization is going to need to do. Are you funded for that and resourced to be able to do that over the term of the easement? And just explain that a little bit, what those
Yeah.
activities would be.
Yep. So our legal responsibility is to do annual monitoring one time of year. So every conservation easement project that we bring on, we require a stewardship fund to be contributed from the landowner. All of those funds are pooled in an investment fund that we then draw a small percentage out each year to fund our conservation easement monitoring program. We also have a legal defense fund in case there is, a violation or something we need to enforce. And the Land Trust Alliance actually has a legal team. It's called Terra Firma that also helps with enforcement and legal defense. So our stewardship costs are covered for our annual monitoring. And then if we have to do additional work, we have money for that as well.
And when you do your monitoring, is it the same time every year or are you sort of changing so that you see it in different seasons?
We do it in different seasons. We like to see it, after the cattle get off some years, and then some years we like to do it in the spring to get, the full flora and fauna as well.
Thanks so much. And the reason I bring this up is that I've been hearing from a couple of folks, easement holders, including folks that hold easements pursuant to WCB grants, that there could be more coordination and sort of cross-learning between folks. And some folks are concerned with that sort of long-term resourcing for monitoring and enforcement. I think there just could be more coordination around easement holders, because getting more land under easement is obviously a more cost-effective way to help us reach our goals for restoration and acquisition. But there has to be, enforcement and monitoring. And if there's a way that we can do that cost effectively, especially with, the funds that are here to make some systemic changes, that could be a discussion to have. So I just wanted to raise that.
Any other questions? Any public comment?
Any public comment?
There's no public comment.
Pardon?
There is no public comment.
Great, thank you. All right, do I have a motion?
I will move, we approve the agenda item as staff recommends.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great, thank you. And I did just receive note that Board Member Pavley, Senator Pavley is online. So Browner, can you hear us? Are you there?
Or are you on mute?
Yeah, she might be having trouble too, because I know she's in an area that is at best sketchy with connection. So we'll continue to move on. And please speak up, Fran, if you're able to join. So we'll move on to item number 18, the Truckee River Wildlife Area Boca Unit Restoration Project. And Gina Grossman on our staff will present the project to the board.
Thank you, John, members of the board. This proposal is to consider the allocation for a grant to the Truckee River Watershed Council to restore 11 acres of riparian and floodplain habitat in the Boca unit of California Department of Fish and Wildlife's Truckee River Wildlife Area, approximately 5 miles northeast of Truckee in Nevada County. In this location map, we can see the project area indicated as a red dot to the east of Truckee and north of Lake Tahoe. And we can see an inset map on the left side of the slide, and that shows the Truckee River Wildlife Area as dark brown polygons. And the Boca unit, which is the project area we're discussing today, is represented as that red crosshatched area. Next slide, please. So the Boca unit is a very popular fishing and outdoor recreation spot outside of Truckee. And it's bounded by the Truckee River, which forms an oxbow around it, as well as Highway 80 along the northern side of it. And you can see a bridge for Highway 80 in the background here. Next slide. Oh, next slide, please. This is an aerial photo of the project site. You can see the Boca unit outlined in red and Highway 80 to the north and Truckee River flowing around it. The yellow dotted line represents a railroad spur, a historic railroad spur in this area. And that railroad spur functions and looks like a spur levee. So it disconnects a lot of those Truckee River flows from what would be floodplain habitat on the Boca unit. As a result, the river is constrained to its channel during flood events, and it exacerbates erosion downstream. Next slide. This is an excerpt from the design drawings for this project, and it includes degrading or removing a portion of that spur levee to reconnect that floodplain function. And it also decommissions a subset of the trails on site. And it modifies or adapts a soil borrow pit on site into a stormwater retention basin to treat stormwater runoff. Next slide. This is a ground level view of that spur levee, and you can see the Truckee River on the left, and again, Highway 80 in the background. Next slide. And this is a portion of the remnant riparian habitat on site that we expect to be enhanced through the project. So on the bottom right, we can see an excerpt of the hydrologic modeling that shows an increased inundation under flood events post-project. Okay, so project benefits would include improving riparian habitat and improving water quality in the system. Next slide. I'd mentioned the area is popular as outdoor recreation, and there's a nature interpretation sign shown here. And you can see one of the W weirs, one of several that were installed several years ago along the Truckee River and are popular with for fishing in this area. Staff recommends the project as proposed. I'm happy to answer any questions that the board might have. And in the audience, I believe online today, we have Michelle Prestowitz, project director with the Truckee River Watershed Council.
Great, thank you, Judah. Any board member questions? Comments?
I have a question, not necessarily for our presenter, but maybe for the board. And I chalk this up to me being new on this board. So what does determine when we require or include a requirement for baseline monitoring and or site visits by the WCB? Because I noticed for the easement, for the last one, both of those things were included. For a project like this, neither of those things is included. I was just curious why that is.
Yeah.
How that's determined.
So all of the projects that we do, whether they're restoration or grant projects, require monitoring, continued monitoring and management for acquisition projects, it's in perpetuity. For restoration projects, it's really dependent upon the type of project it is and the life of the project and the life of the funding. Typically, they range from 10 to 25 years for monitoring. The grantees are required to report back to the board periodically, annually, or annually reporting. And then our staff, your staff, is allowed through our grant agreement to get out on the property at least once every 3 years. And so there is that monitoring requirement. We do have a pretty robust, we're starting to get our monitoring program up and running again because it was put on a little hiatus during the COVID pandemic process. But, you know, we do have a pretty robust plan in place at the staff level to monitor projects, whether they be acquisition projects, easement projects, or restoration projects. So there is that commitment. There is that reporting requirement. Staff on restoration projects, they get out on a pre-project, during the project, and then final project site visits, and then subsequently every 3 years after that. So we do have a pretty robust monitoring system for both restoration and acquisition.
So two other thoughts. I would offer, so unlike the prior agenda item, I do think there's sometimes a distinction in property ownership. So this project is property already owned by the state. That should never mean we obviate kind of monitoring through the water board. But I do think sometimes property ownership shapes, you know, how kind of the board implements its oversight. And then secondly, I do think from the department's perspective, as we do these projects, we should use the project as the learning laboratory and be doing our own monitoring. We're engaged at the department front trying to figure out sentinel sites across the entire state for purposes of climate effect, you know, adaptation. And we should be thinking about that on the department side in partnership with the board on these kinds of projects.
May I add to that a little bit?
Please.
So as John mentioned, we did the initial site inspection here, and the photos you see here are a subset, and we document our observations, and we have a report that we keep to file. But in this case, there's also an assessment for the Truckee River watershed that documented both this and other projects and why it was thought to be a potential site for restoration. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other board member questions or comments?
But just to follow up on that, so this is, and this maybe is a little tangential, so thank you for indulging me, but I got a chance last week for the Fish and Game Commission meeting to go take a tour of the Ocean Ranch Restoration Project at the Eel River Wildlife Area. And that's, another project that we funded, and it is incredibly impressive. And because it involves, a lot of breaching roads and a lot of earth moving heavy machinery, I found myself wanting, and I don't know the details of the monitoring that's going to be done up there, but I did talk to both the Ducks Unlimited and department folks. But, some of these projects, it would be so helpful to have them really detailed in like a robust case study to be shared in other parts of the state, because we certainly have restoration projects throughout the state where, especially when it comes to heavy machinery and moving a lot of earth, that can be kind of contentious, right? So really, detailing as much as we can in terms of these case studies, and then being able to detail the outcomes in terms of ecological impacts and the habitat impacts. I think it's just of paramount importance. I love that we're able to fund all these projects, and I guess I just have this desire for us to just make sure we're writing it all down so that it can be shared as, illustrative templates for other future projects elsewhere in the state.
Final reports are good notes of that,
Yeah.
but the point's well taken.
Great.
Yeah. Any public comment on this particular item?
There are no raised hands.
Great. Thank you. Any members in the audience? All right, seeing none, I have a motion.
I recommend that we approve this project as proposed.
Great, thank you.
I'll second.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you, Judah. All right, that takes us to item number 19, the Western Placer County HCP NCCP Red Wing Ranch South Project. Brian Gibson on our staff will present the project. Brian?
Thank you, John. Red Wing Ranch South is located in Placer County, immediately east of Sheridan, north of Lincoln. The 560-acre property directly abuts the neighboring 400-acre Bradley property to the northwestern corner, and the 200-acre Ellis Ranch property to the west, both of which are protected lands by the Placer Conservation Authority. There are no improvements on the property, which has been historically operated as a seasonal cattle ranch from April to November of each year. The Western Placer County HCP NCCP plan area is roughly 261,000 acres, shown in yellow, and stretches from Highway 49 in Auburn to the Sacramento Placer County line. The HCP NCCP became fully permitted and operational in April of 2021. Next slide, please. There are two ponds totaling approximately 23 acres located in the middle of the property. The ponds are filled by direct precipitation and usually dry out in the summer. Next slide, please. The property contains about 170 acres of wetlands, 150 acres of which are comprised of a historically terraced vernal pool pond complex. Next slide, please. The Placer Conservation Authority anticipates utilizing the property for multiple purposes, including preservation of both federal and state listed species and their habitat. Next slide, please. Surveys have confirmed the presence of federally threatened vernal pool fairy shrimp on the property. The property also supports habitat for 5 additional covered species, including Swainson's hawk, western burrowing owl, tricolored blackbird, California black rail, and elderberry longhorn beetle. All the listed species will benefit directly from acquisition of this property and indirectly from the HCP NCCP's conservation strategy for establishing an approximately 47,000 acre interconnected reserve system. Next slide. The Placer Conservation Authority administers the Placer County Conservation Program and is responsible for acquiring and managing reserve units across Western Placer County. for both conservation and mitigation purposes. The property is proposed for fee title acquisition and will contribute to the goals and objectives of Placer County Conservation Program. The Placer Conservation Authority will manage the property once it's acquired. The habitat will be maintained in conjunction with both existing and future properties to be acquired by the authority. Staff recommends that the Wildlife Conservation Board approve this project as proposed and authorize staff to enter into the appropriate agreements necessary to accomplish the project. Attending today's meeting via Zoom is Greg McKenzie. He's the Executive Director with Placer Conservation Authority. Rebecca Lillis, she's a Senior Conservation Planner with Placer County Conservation Program. And Robert Wagant, he is a Placer County Supervisor.
Great.
Questions?
Thank you, Brian. Any questions from board members? Seeing none. I don't believe I have any speaker cards on. Oh, yes, we do have speakers for this. Supervisor Wagan?
Supervisor Wagan, you should be able to speak.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Good morning. Great staff presentation. I, first of all, will make myself available for any questions that you have any, but the project is one of real high profile for us. The property has long been known for having great conservation value and has long been sought after. We propose this to be 100% non-mitigation funded using Section 6 monies and hopefully Wildlife Conservation Board monies and about $500,000 of county general fund monies. The property in terms of its profile was actually acquired in 2005 by Del Webb and Pulte for the purpose of mitigating impacts from their projects that they had in the queue, but it has since been sold and now is available. Staff did a good job of talking about its biological attributes. The Conservation Authority has been up and running now for a little bit over a year, and we've had a very aggressive and busy list of tactics and agenda items that were pursued. So just wanted to highlight all of that and mention that about the vast majority of the conservation that will occur as a result of the conservation program are in my supervisorial district, but also the vast majority of development that's covered by the plan will also occur in my district. So to me, it's just a great example of what we've been trying to accomplish and what we're going forward with. So happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Supervisor. Greg McKenzie, Executive Director of Placer County Conservation Authority.
Yes, good morning, Chair, members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Supervisor Wygant. I'll be brief, given that he covered this well, and want to mostly thank staff for their time, thoroughness, and professionalism in bringing this forward. They are an example of a very high bar that I hope my staff can follow as we acquire lands and put them into conservation over the next 50 years. This property is really the culmination of about 20 years of work personally for myself. I originally toured all the state and federal agencies, wetland and wildlife regulatory agencies in 2003. Supervisor Wygant attended. We've lost many of those members of the wildlife agencies, regulatory agencies to retirement and other career changes. And Robert have remained constant in our pursuit of this property. So fast forward to 2022, after a year of working with your staff and Section 6 staff at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and we're proud to bring this forward. As Robert mentioned, is a conservation funded acquisition, no mitigation dollars associated with it. We've had a long relationship with the Wildlife Conservation Board and the Placer Land Trust. Some of those acquisitions you may recall through our Placer Legacy program. As Robert mentioned, in this case, Placer Legacy is contributing about $500,000 of non-mitigation general funds out of the county's general fund budget to assist in the acquisition of this property. And so we go way back with Wildlife Conservation Board. I think the first acquisition I worked on with you and your staff was the Bruin Ranch, which is about 1,800 acres on the Bear River, utilizing about $5 million of conservation funds out of Placer Legacy and WCB matching funds from various sources of about another $5 million. So we look forward to closing escrow on this property, writing conservation easement for review by all the state and federal agencies that we're required to under the HCP and CCP, and then moving forward with management plans, grazing management plans, wildfire management plans, and an obligation of ours under the HCP and CCP is to restore properties. And so we will be in pursuit of that here very quickly, hopefully, as we work through the last remaining details of this acquisition. I too am available to help answer questions should you have any. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. McKenzie. We do have Mike Garabedian from Placer County tomorrow, and Mr. Garabedian is in opposition to the project. So if Mr. Garabedian can, if he still wishes to talk.
Thank you. Mike Garabedian, Placer County tomorrow. It's a great day to be witnessing your birthday for a board that's roughly the same age as I am. So our involvement with the board began 2 days ago, and to explore the relationship between Placer County conservation efforts and this board. The great news is the ready availability of your staff. We can't thank you enough. And it's a beginning of a relationship. And in this case, about the relationship of conservation efforts and so forth to this project, which we have not had enough time to explore to actually form an opinion about it. So we're looking forward to that and doing that and working with the staff on that about this and other issues. There is a shocking loss of wetlands, vernal pools, and other habitat being approved regularly by the Placer County Conservation Plan without what we consider to be the necessary public information and involvement. So the board, we are sure, is taking care of that side of its effort, its work, and more. And so we will, in the future, look forward to assuring that we understand the relationship between Placer County efforts and the board, and are certain that it will be a successful outcome. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Mr. Garabedian. And please, feel free to reach out to me or my staff at any time should you have any questions or just want some more information on WCB and what we do and how we work with others, and particularly Placer County Authority. So looking forward to the conversation going forward.
Thank
Right.
you.
Any other public member questions or comments?
We have no raised hands.
Great. Any additional comments or questions from the board?
Just a further comment after that public speaker feedback. I think it's also incumbent on local county government that's also a leading partner in implementing federal habitat conservation plans and state NCCPs to be available for their constituencies to understand better these projects and purposes. So I'd like to thank the supervisors who appeared in kind of in advance for their offices being open for any constituent questions as well.
Thank you. Any other comments? Do I have a motion?
I'll move to approve this agenda item as recommended.
Second.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Motion carries. Thank you, Brian. All right, this takes us to item number 20. And I would like to ask the board if they'll indulge me on this. I'd like for us to hear items 20, 21, and 25. Staff will present each project. We will act upon each project as they come forward, but we'll take them we'll take items 25, or we'll take item 25 out of order and have it presented right after item number 21, if the board's okay with that. Great, so
You will hear 21 debate and move on 21, go to 22, then do 25.
No, we'll bring 25 after 21.
Got it.
So 22 will come after item 25. So with that, item number 20 in the agenda, the Climate Smart Restoration at River Garden Farms project. This is to consider a grant to Audubon, California, and Kurt Malchow on our staff will print the project. Kurt?
Thank you, John. Good morning, board members. This proposal is to consider the allocation for a grant to Audubon, California for a cooperative project with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, RRG Garden Properties, River Partners, and the Center for Land-Based Learning to enhance and restore up to 19 acres of riparian habitat on River Garden Farms. Next slide, please. River Garden Farms is a 15,000 acre farm located along the Sacramento River, about 25 miles northwest of Sacramento. The farm grows rice, alfalfa, safflower, wheat, walnuts, corn, and sunflower. The farm has a history of active conservation, adopting such practices as installing native vegetation and cover crops to improve soil health and pollinator habitat, timing rice field flooding to benefit migratory birds, and rescuing waterfowl eggs and endangered giant garter snakes in fields before harvest. Recently, the farm has changed ownership, but the new owners intend to continue with conservation practices, particularly through their role in this project. Next slide, please. The project site is a 1.6 mile linear strip of land running northeast through their farm property along an irrigation canal and is shown highlighted yellow on the aerial image on the left here. The selection of this site stems from a comprehensive planning effort led by American Rivers in partnership with Audubon, California, River Partners, Environmental Defense Fund, and Ducks Unlimited to develop a farm restoration plan that includes design plans for 7 different sites within the River Garden Farms property, totaling 550 acres. This project is intended to implement one of these 7 restoration sites. The project site also lies within Central Valley Joint Ventures Sacramento Planning Region and would contribute 19 acres to one of their objectives of restoring over 8,000 acres of riparian habitat in the region. One end of the restoration site comes within 0.6 miles of the Sacramento River Riparian Beltway, and the other end is within a quarter mile of Roosevelt Ranch, which contains over 2,500 acres of restored wetlands. Once restored, the project site will serve as a habitat corridor between these 2 areas. Next slide, please. This slide shows the canal side of the project, Canal 14A facing west. The dark line on the horizon is the Sacramento River Riparian Corridor. Currently, the vegetation along the canal banks as well as along the adjacent road is sparse and covered with weeds. The project would install native plants along 2 linear strips on either side of the road seen here on the right. Next slide. This slide is looking east along the other side of the road. The riparian tree line of the Sacramento River can be seen on the horizon here as well. On this side, a relatively new but sparsely planted hedgerow was installed, but does not provide enough density for habitat continuity. Next slide, please. This is a closer view of the existing hedgerow vegetation between the road and the farm. This area was planted as part of a recent CDFA-sponsored Healthy Soils Program project. To improve habitat quality and provide connectivity, the bare spaces between these plantings need additional vegetation. This project would double the number of plants in this area to create the structural density needed to provide a continuous beltway between the 2 existing larger habitat areas. The planting design has been carefully selected to maximize the climate resiliency of the habitat for long-term wildlife benefit. Next slide, please. This is another view of the canal side near the north end of the project where there are some trees, but their pattern is a widely spaced single row with weedy undergrowth. Next slide. Community participation is a key component of the project. The slide shows a field visit held for the local farming community where the benefits of hedgerow planting were described by Yolo County RCD staff. The project team is committed to continue this kind of work. Next slide, please. Youth education is another key component. The hedgerow plantings we saw in one of the earlier slides was placed by regional high school students participating in the Student and Landowner Education and Watershed Stewardship, or SLUES program, operated by the Center for Land-Based Learning. The SLUES program serves high school students residing in the Sacramento Valley region, often from low-income communities. This first experience was successful, and the Center for Land-Based Learning is also a partner to the current proposed project and will involve the SLUES program youth. 3 hands-on field days are planned to help students develop knowledge and skills in science, habitat restoration, and environmental stewardship. This will also include learning activities in the classroom as well as on the farm to provide them with the necessary context on the impact of their work. Next slide, please. Once implemented, the project will provide habitat connectivity, benefiting threatened and endangered fish, wildlife, and plant species, improving water quality and soil health while increasing net carbon storage. Staff recommends that the Wildlife Conservation Board approve this project as proposed and allocate $709,377 of Proposition 68 funds. And before closing, if I may add an update to, as the board knows, the revegetation approach included on this project includes use of herbicide. The project partners have agreed to rearrange their in-kind contributions to cover the purchase of these materials outside of the grant, but will still need to use grant funds to work with them. So with that, we welcome discussion on this and any other project topics. And joining us in person today is Samantha Arthur, the Working Lands Program Director for Audubon, California. Joining us remotely is Michael Rogner, Senior Restoration Ecologist at River Partners, as well as Jordan Iskin, analyst, and Jim James, Principal, representing RRG Garden Properties. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kurt. Any board member comments?
Yeah. So as you know, I've been very concerned about the use of glyphosate and the board's funding of glyphosate. And started talking about that when I first started a year ago. So this is kind of my 1-year anniversary on this board. In that year, I've had a chance to do more research, and there's been more developments in the world of glyphosate and glyphosate research. In June 16th, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal basically sided with several environmental groups and said that the US EPA analysis of glyphosate was inadequate and told them to continue with their process of doing a new analysis. And part of the problem with their analysis was that they didn't do the appropriate analysis under the ESA before they came to their conclusion about how to use glyphosate. They have since produced a draft biological evaluation that shows that about 1,600 species on the endangered species list will suffer poor outcomes from exposure to glyphosate. And there has been, and that is based on existing literature. And there has been in the last 5 years especially, but before then, a growing stream of literature about the effects of glyphosate. What I appreciate about what the staff has done is presenting to applicants this form to fill out about alternatives. Have you considered alternatives? In your project, you did look at what would be alternatives to using herbicides, especially glyphosate. And it would require hiring somebody for a couple of years full-time and then on a part-time basis for, I think, 3 years. We have an abundance of funds right now, and I would prefer to see an application, especially an application with my former employer, Environmental Defense Fund, that was founded in part by science teachers who were concerned about the effects of DDT. I would be more comfortable supporting this if it included additional funding so that you could do more mechanical elimination of the weeds that you need to get rid of and eliminate the use of glyphosate on this project.
Thank you for bringing these points up, especially in the contextual to the court case regarding the usage of glyphosate. That's very informative and sure to
I think that
projects in certain ways.
That actually reminds me, I'd like to give this to put it in the record because I think it's going to be important for our future discussions. It's the Natural Resources Defense Council Pesticide Action Network North America versus US EPA, and it was combined with Rural Coalition Organization in California, De Lideres Campesinos, Farm Worker Association of Florida, Beyond Pesticides, and Center for Food Safety versus US EPA. And it was decided in June.
I could, because I think this is a topic going to be discussed in the next two agenda items. as
Yeah,
well.
exactly.
So a couple thoughts. First, Catherine, I'd say for a whole host of reasons, your 1 year anniversary has been a great one at the board because you've been urging and pushing the board to evolve on this topic. So in my view, the board staff are doing things today in this space they weren't doing a year ago.
Yeah.
Now, is there more evolution to happen? Probably. But my second thought would be, we have different opinions being expressed to the board from different parts of this debate. And I think the board should be mindful of that because we have a set of restoration specialists who are coming in this same discussion and arguing their view about how they're handling use and application. So I think the board's job is to kind of listen to all that and try to figure out how we want to move the board through. So my third and final point is a little bit of this is on our shoulders. In a prior meeting, we agreed we would put this purposefully in a workshop session to continue to think through how we'll handle it. We have not been able to schedule the workshop. That's a little bit on us. So I would encourage us to find the workshop space to have the conversation we intend to have and figure out how we want to keep kind of moving this item through the board's approach.
Well, Chuck, I appreciate everything you said, and I also appreciated what Doug Johnson said earlier on the phone comments. I think we do have to let science drive this. And I think the science has evolved even in the last year to a point where we potentially put the state and the legal situation, because I think you're probably aware of the Supreme Court decision on the heavy penalties glyphosate case, that we're put in a position where we're faced by three things. One is, are we exposing the state to legal action in the future if we're approving projects that use our funding for glyphosate use? Two, are we violating the science in a way? Are we doing more harm to the wildlife with glyphosate than we previously realized because we just haven't looked at the science? And I think new evidence that's been coming out, especially about effects on birds and insects of various sorts, not just bees, earthworms, you can go on and on, suggests that we aren't following our mission if we're allowing this very heavily used pesticide to continue to be used in wildlife situations. And then, well, those are the two biggies. So while it has evolved, I think in this case, the applicant has indicated in their glyphosate form that there is another route. And that what we should do in this case is to allow the applicant additional time to figure out what's it going to cost and to come back with a higher bill for us so that they don't have to use glyphosate. I appreciate the effort to find some other funder so that we're not paying for the glyphosate. But it's still, I think we have sort of a moral obligation as a state agency to make sure that we're not putting things into the environment that will counter our purpose and our mission.
I hear you, and I would just encourage the board to have a purposeful discussion in a workshop. And also I'd be open to, like, with the experts in front of us, like do it in a public forum. On the legal question, I would ask our lawyers to analyze that and give us legal advice.
Yeah, we might actually want to reach out to the AG's office for that too.
Well, okay, so certainly a process the board attorneys can go through in conjunction with, experts at the Attorney General's office. And then second, I would benefit from hearing qualified individuals who may fall anywhere on that spectrum of perspective to give us their input. So we're informed, hearing different views, right?
And I would recommend then, if we're not prepared to encourage the applicants today to come back with a better proposal, that we just tell them to hold off until we've had that broader discussion.
Yeah, I was gonna ask were we planning to do the work? I thought we were gonna try to do the workshop like in September, or October. So would that happen before the next meeting?
We're hoping, we haven't been able, we've haven't found a date that works for all the board members. And what I was going to recommend at the end of the meeting was that we're going to move forward, find a date that works for the majority of board members, then hold a workshop. And hopefully board members can move their dates around to accommodate, but I would recommend that we go forward because I don't want to push this can down the road much longer. I want to have the workshop. I don't want to have, I don't want to be back here a year from today saying the same thing that we can't find a date. So we are going to hold a workshop. Whether or not we can hold that before the next meeting, I don't know, but we're going to probably try.
And if the public would bear with us for a minute, and this is how it's supposed to work. We don't talk previously, so we sort it out in front of you, and that's, sunshine. So getting to the bottom line, Catherine, is you're thinking here that agenda items 21, whatever comes next, and then 25, the three projects are each projects you'll be thinking, can we not vote on the merits, but, delay for then having the intervening workshop?
Well, my initial thinking was that on 20 and 21, because the applicants did their due diligence and came up with some ideas about how to avoid using glyphosate and they said what the alternatives would be in their application, that we could take them up on that and encourage them to go back, come up with new figures for what it would cost for doing more mechanical removal, and then have them come back in November. On the item 25, I think it's a slightly different case. I don't think any thought has been given to doing anything else other than using glyphosate and other pesticides. And I do think in that case on 25, we're also talking about, that's the one that's a federal project, isn't it, on federal lands?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so for 20, we could, there's 4 of us, so do the math. We could continue to engage with the applicant and staff and see if there's an appetite to move the project, or whether there's a consensus of some other procedural approach. I'd be interested perhaps if the applicants want to say anything. It's up to you whether you want to engage. Like the moment you're at in your project, the aspect of going back and sharpening pencils to return with some scoped, financing dynamic around mechanical instead of application. I don't know if you want to offer any feedback on that.
Before we get there, real quick, I had a clarifying question for Catherine. So an alternative to glyphosate in terms of an herbicide was asked about, and they said there was a suitable alternative, but the material use was cost prohibitive.
Well,
at that budget.
On
But
this,
is your,
on this project, at that budget, on this project, they could hire additional staff, I think is what you were saying.
right,
If they were going to do.
but wouldn't you
mechanical.
want to explore the cost points for each of those? Because maybe the alternative herbicide that's not glyphosate could come in lower than the mechanical, unless there were some benefits to the mechanical.
I
like
don't know,
educating
I don't
students
know
or
that they were talking about alternative pesticides, were they?
Yeah, they say generic is this one is a suitable alternative, but the current price point makes the material use cost prohibitive. So there could be it's a short answer, so they could
Yeah.
expand on that, but it sounds like there could be an alternative
Yeah.
herbicide that's not glyphosate.
Although, my personal position is, why are we putting pesticides into wild areas anyway?
I tend to agree with that, but I want to make sure all the options are on the table. to try to
Yeah,
move
I
this
think
forward.
the option I want is to get pesticides out of WCB funded projects. Because I think our ultimate goal here is to protect wildlife. and nature. And I don't think we do that with pesticides, especially when you consider what's happening with the international crash of insect populations, pollinator populations. We're not talking about climate change, but we're sort of at that stage in terms of wildlife and what's happening. We can't afford to
Well,
make
but
those
it does sound like there are some experts out there who are saying, let's say you had a non-glyphosate herbicide that there aren't, whatever, it's safer, there aren't proven
I think that,
effects.
yeah.
Could be targeted in a way that gets rid of the invasives that are harming the restoration or the ecosystem. And then you don't have that.
I suspect theoretically, there might be somebody out there who, in the pesticide application world, who will say this is better than that. But the reality is that in the pesticide world, the pesticide people say glyphosate is the most effective. And that's partly because it's the most available, the most widely used, and the volume of usage has jumped exponentially over the years.
So if I could just on process point, thinking about the moment we're at right now, any practitioner or current and future applicant is probably on notice now that, a portion of the board, holds a strong perspective, which is totally fine. I think to take an institution like the board through this space, we will need structured decision-making that allows kind of a description, a presentation. Those experts, board may be able to determine that come to the topic because they're sharing the value of restoration. So the question is, at restoration, it's best way to achieve it, all things considered, and hear that. Some ability for us to hear that, the public to offer their views. Let me finish for a second. And then the board's going to have to figure out how it wants to move its funding role through that. I'm not sure where any other board member may be. I know where one is. So that's a little bit longer term. It may take a cycle, who knows? We should do it fast because it's going to create a chilling effect for those that are trying to do projects on the ground, where it's equally important to do the restoration for a whole suite of other biodiversity benefits.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you about that, Chuck. I might reframe it a little bit, and then I think we need more than just restoration experts telling us what should be going on. But that being said, I think we do have two projects here where they have the opportunity to fund them at a higher level so they don't have to use glyphosate. And maybe we should give the applicant an opportunity to speak.
So let's acknowledge we got to do the kind of systematic kind of structured discussion. And now can we turn to agenda item 20? And I see the applicant's representative might be interested in saying something.
Yeah, it also seems like our speaker, Kurt, would like to say something.
I think I was going in that direction, is that the recent, this discussion and some of the potential consequences of it come with a temporal consequence. This project was held back from the May board meeting for another reason. They have an upcoming field season, and there are, so the issue of time with the limited time that they have to finish the project. Also, I'd like to have the applicants kind of discuss into the aspects of these alternatives that were provided in the questionnaire. So with that, Samantha.
Thanks for the opportunity to chime in. Samantha Arthur from Audubon, California. And as you can imagine, we're a bird conservation organization. So this is an issue that we grapple with and that we think about because birds rely on insects and are impacted by pesticide use. I just want to provide a little bit of kind of big picture here in how we approach restoration projects. And first and foremost, it's that we take every possible approach to reduce the use of herbicides within the logistical ability to implement the project. So there's a timing component here that I want to touch upon. But mostly I want to point out that we're working in a farm environment here. And so we see this restoration project as an opportunity to phase out and transition this 19 acres from 19 acres that has herbicide applied to establishing a native vegetation understory that then functions as the weed control. So we're transitioning and phasing out herbicide use here to create a hedgerow and connect to larger conservation areas. So to us, we see that as a net decrease in herbicide use over time, and then creating the biodiversity benefits for birds, for insects, for other species. So I want to provide that kind of context and also to emphasize the farm environment here. So we are phasing out herbicide use in that restored area. And then just to chime in a little bit on the logistical side, as you can imagine, it's not just a function of funding for us right now. It's a function of staffing and a function of timing. So we are, our timeline here is to initiate the mainline irrigation in November and start our planting shortly thereafter. We are in the process of hiring staff right now to be able to implement this project. So there's a time function for us that I think really ripples through and would delay this a full year if we could not proceed today. So I do just want to provide that context, and I'm happy to answer additional questions. And we've also got our implementing partner on the line, River Partners, if you have more specific herbicide questions.
Well, given that we're providing the bulk of the funding, it seems a little premature to be hiring staff already before the funding has been approved. So that argument doesn't really work for me.
Well, I mean, we're planning. We're just planning ahead for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I appreciate what you've said, but I don't agree with it. And I continue to be fairly shocked that Audubon and Environmental Defense Fund are coming before us proposing a project that you will then have young people going out and participating in and, doing on the ground work in an area that has been sprayed. I just find it sort of gobsmacking.
Let me interject. The one thing I will do is, I don't know if this position's chair or president. Let's take a deep breath, everyone. People come to the board with honest intentions to achieve, outcomes of values we all share. So with a sense of the moment, the mood, how about this as an approach? What if we insisted amongst ourselves, we convened, say, in mid-September, and we don't let our calendar say I can't get together, and we do some form of, I'm making it up on the fly, half a day. And the half a day dynamic is really about the topic, some structured, informative, public staff controls, kind of how to set it up. Moment on this topic, right? Hour, 2 hours, whatever. We're going to end up more informed after that. And we're going to have a moment in time where people can express their opinions. And at the end of that, it will have given at least project 20, and I forget the damn numbers, whatever the other one is, not 25. 3 weeks, 4 weeks to have heard at least a board member saying, could you do additional, calculations? And we could also have agendaized these 2 projects. That's not as late as going to November. And it may still allow, if there's a resolution in this moment for the individual projects, them to hit schedule, and we are accelerating the broader policy question we want to engage on.
Yeah, you mean bring it up, assuming we get our September meeting scheduled.
We have a special, I don't want to call it special, but we have a purposeful special meeting in September.
Fine with me if the applicants are willing to come back later for that with a different approach.
So Donnelly, can you summarize to me? Because I just want to say one more thing, which is to really open the door to the continuing work together and then continuing conversation. This is a 3-year project. So, you know, I do want to make that commitment that we can continue to be a part of that discussion and feedback, but that again, you know, we're doing a phasing out process of herbicides, and there's a year 2 and a year 3 that we could be happy to work with staff and be involved in those conversations. But we do have kind of a logistical challenge here in terms of starting our planting this season.
I think I'm basically saying, give us a number that you would require to hire that extra staff so that it could be done mechanically or in other ways that don't use glyphosate.
So just for awareness, transparency, I'm, all things considered today, you know, comfortable leaning towards, you know, a yes on this agenda item, but there's 4 of us. And part of my job is not what I just may be thinking, but also the institution itself in the moment. So look, if there's someone here that wants to consider moving on the agenda item, you know, board members need to speak up. And I
for Samantha, that the proposal that our chair laid out would be to have a focused discussion specifically around herbicide use, and then during that same meeting, bring back this project as well as item number 21
Okay.
for consideration in September.
Okay. In terms of the dollar amount, we've done a bit of that due diligence, and my understanding from our implementing partners, River Partners, is that in terms of it's the labor hours, right, that change. And so you're talking about an hour per acre for herbicide application to treat that area. And then you're talking 75 hours per acre for hand pulling. So that's the difference we're talking about there, is a 75-fold increase in labor. You know, back of the envelope, it's like $500,000 at least. I'd have to look at that more closely, but wanted to share that switch from an hour to 75 hours.
And what about the questionnaire also talked about a potential alternative to glyphosate that could be cost prohibitive? Did you price that out?
I'm gonna ask if my implementing partner, River Partners, who's on the line here, wants to weigh in on that at all. I think, you know, we've really talked through in detail the careful precautions that would be taken and I understand that there's more information that we're all learning, as you pointed out, board member Phillips. But we've talked in detail about how cautious our implementing partners will be in reducing the amount of herbicide used and in following all of the precautions needed for safety in the application of herbicides. So I can pass it over to our implementing partner, Michael, who's on the line, if you guys are that tech savvy.
I'm not.
Yeah. You'd have to, Celeste or Alexa.
He
so
should be able to unmute himself now.
Pardon?
Oh, Michael should be able to unmute himself now.
Great. And I think the question for Michael is the switching out of that herbicide. That was your question, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've figured out the unmute part of this. So thank you for allowing me to talk. You know, this is obviously something that you know we all think about, and we need to think about a lot more. You know, just to put this in context, River Partners, you know, was founded 23 years ago by an organic blueberry farmer, and our director of operations, who is responsible for you know, implementing projects across the state, grew up on an organic cotton farm. And so we're, you know, just culturally, we're very deeply rooted in farming practices that don't require herbicide. Over the years, we've made a lot of great innovations on how to reduce that use, but we've never gotten to the point where we can meet project goals without actually using some form of herbicides. I'd be happy in some sort of workshop setting to present, you know, anything on our methods that we've used to reduce herbicides. The most recent example is from our Dos Rios project, we made some changes in how we implemented the project, and it basically reduced the cost of herbicides from $125 per acre down to about a little bit less than $9 per acre. So, 95 or 93% decrease in the amount of chemicals that we were using. For the particular question about glyphosate, we rely on pesticide application experts to make recommendations on which chemicals will treat specific weeds. And so there are some weeds out there that glyphosate is really the only label that targets that specific weed. And so it makes it very difficult to phase it out completely. We have alternatives that we can use on a number of other weeds. I don't know that the council will be any more satisfied with the safety precaution labels on those chemicals as they are with glyphosate. So that's a bridge we'll have to cross when we get there. So the long the long answer to a short question is, without knowing the specific weeds, it's really difficult to provide a prescription several years ahead of time as to what we would need to be spraying.
In relationship to the $500,000, is that over 3 years, over 5 years, or is that $500,000 per year, or it's over the 3-year life of the project?
Now, so that was just looking at site prep. Yeah, it's like 350 to 500,000 in the site prep time period, because you're doing that much more labor in the hand pulling. That was our back of the envelope calculation on that.
Okay, because in the glyphosate questionnaire, I think it was mentioned that you figured you'd need to hire one full-time person for 2 years and something else if you were going to do it mechanically.
Yeah, so I think
it would mean designing a full-time position to this project in addition to what was requested in the budget. And they could be responsible for irrigation and full-time vegetation management. After year 2, the position would go to half-time. Employee plus burden plus 40 hours a week, associated costs of vehicle use every day, all necessary tools and equipment.
Yeah, so I think, the logistical challenge I want to point out on our end is it's not that there's the increased hours and labor at discrete time periods. So that's a challenge in terms of us kind of implementing those labor hours. But yeah, that we went back since that questionnaire, and our team has been working together over the last couple of weeks to really think about what is needed in this project and how we can be as cautious as possible.
Yeah.
And also, the challenges of implementing hand labor on this time frame.
Because we saw a soil-borne farm. We had a tour or John invited me on it with Wildlife Conservation Board staff, et cetera. And they aren't using pesticides and haven't for a number of years, and they do restoration in addition to their regular things. So it might be worth talking to them. But that being said, $500,000 sounds like a lot of money. But when you consider the costs of the lawsuits that have been that have been won by the plaintiffs, that's just a tiny fraction of one payoff in one of those lawsuits. Additionally, we have a pretty large budget right now that we haven't had as large a budget in the past. And I think if you look at what Californians want, they want safe food, they want clean air, they want clean water, they want clean soil if they're thinking about soil. It's not too much to ask this board to give you more money to do it in a way that protects the environment more aggressively.
Let me interject again. Let me interject again and just kind of managing as the chair. So we're having a robust discussion. I think out of the corner of my eye, I see another representative from River Partners who may want to say something. But we also should just manage ourselves. We could probably debate it back and forth for quite some time. We have a specific agenda item. We, as a board, could either see if there's appetite to take up the agenda item as an approved, disapproved kind of dynamic. And I think two of us should see where the other two might lean. Or we could try the mid-September, deep breath, hear from experts, and then come back to these specific agenda items. I'm open to any other way to handle the moment we're in, but we also should be cognizant of the other agenda items. And with that, let me just, Julia, you're the executive director of River Partners, and not to foster, we need the debate, but we also need to focus ourselves in on how do we want to handle ourselves right now. Yep.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to address you all today and chime in on this very, very important topic. It's close to everybody here's heart, right? To try to figure out how we do this better. And so thank you for leading this charge here at WCB. It's important. So I'm Julie Retner. I'm the president of River Partners. And what I wanted to add to the conversation today was simply gratitude for the commitment to workshop this topic and move forward on process. And that gratitude is rooted deeply in an enormous sense of urgency that we feel as a result of incredible impacts and loss to the biodiversity of California across the entire state and across all of our ecosystems. And the uniqueness of the position we're in at this moment with such a budget opportunity to actually take a big bite of restoring that lost biodiversity. And so to us, the cost efficiency and the time and the urgency of implementing restoration projects with the most precise and effective processes we have in our toolbox is of utmost importance. I just wanted to put, into the conversation here for perspective, the budget for this project that's included currently for herbicide application is around $2,000. And to emphasize what Samantha had described earlier, we're talking about a landscape that's had decades of chemical application to the soils. And this project, if successfully installed, gives us the opportunity to forever retire chemical application to these soils and bring back all of those insects and all of that biodiversity that we're seeking to restore. So again, I really appreciate this conversation. I really think it's a very important one that we need to workshop, and I really appreciate Director Bonham's commitment to process here and moving forward. But the urgency is now, and we need to move these projects forward right away. Thanks.
Thank you, Julie.
Mr. Chair, if I may. I know that it's been raised, there's some concerns about, I think, the financial liability of WCB with respect to these projects. And you did mention some of the payouts. I think there's a very important distinction of a manufacturer being held liable for a cancer-causing product. That's a product's liability. That's a completely different realm of law that we're dealing with. All of our grants do provide indemnity from our grantees for losses resulting from that project. And then in addition to that, in order to sue the state, there's the Government Tort Claims Act, which provides a process and protections to the state that aren't available to, say, private parties. So and I can research this more and provide a memo to you, but I think anytime we do any project, we can be sued. We can be sued for CEQA. It's just inherent in our board approving projects. But I think from the perspective of us funding a third party's project and their application of herbicide, given the indemnity within our agreements, given the Government Tort Claims Act, I don't think I think that's very minimal, if no risk at all, to be frank. So I think if you are considering this project, I think that, I wanted to clarify that for the board to understand.
I appreciate that. It would be from my perspective, at least maybe even for the September thing, if it can be done by then, but I have a feeling it can't be, it would be valuable to have an opinion that we get the AG's office to weigh in on, you know, is this one of these cases where we don't have to worry, just as you've said, are we protected?
If you're asking for a formal AG's opinion, I think that would require an action of the
I don't-
board and we would have to hire them
Yes,
out.
I don't think my impression is, Catherine, opinion has a formal term of art, but I think you may be asking, can we get some informal advice? in
Exactly.
Written form, to which let's ask council to acknowledge that request and then, take it offline, do some outreach and try to act on that.
Yeah, we'll follow up on that. To the extent that we go to the Attorney General's office, even for an informal opinion, I can't guarantee that we'll have something by September.
But duly noted, I think I understand why. Catherine, you're mentioning that. So coming back, at this moment, I think it's a little bit incumbent on either, frankly, Damon or Samantha, do you want to weigh in here on how to handle agenda item 20?
Yeah, I'll start. I'd prefer to wait until September, but I think we need some information, like when is the field, when is the sort of the latest that a delay would impact the project? That'd be helpful to know. Also, if we can schedule the workshop, great, but if not, getting some information from those experts about sort of restoration activities and the targeted use of herbicide and sort of the arguments that you're doing less damage by using small targeted amounts of even glyphosate or some sort of alternative to not doing the restoration would be helpful.
I would say, I want to hold it off too until September, but when we have that discussion, I want to make sure it isn't just the restoration experts, because I've been talking to restoration experts offline as well. And they mostly, in my experience, are relying on the folks who, as a business, do pesticide application. I think what we need to make sure we get are some scientists who are doing research on this kind of thing, on glyphosate and what impacts it has and what the research trends have been.
Yeah, we're happy to do that. When we have engaged the UC system on this particular issue and they have spoke before the board, I think in a meeting before couple meetings ago. And so we'll engage those again as well.
So Julie, if it looks like you're going to try to respond to like, could you still do a project if there were a resolution in September?
Resolution in September would be okay, but my understanding was that we were pushing to the November agenda. No, a decision in September would work. So the timing, the specific question that I heard was around timing for this project. And if we are not able to install that irrigation mainline in the November timeframe, then this project will push a year, which means there will actually be greater amounts of chemical applied to the 20 acres that are in this project than if we can move forward right away. So this is urgent for reduction of chemical application as well as for the project itself.
So this
If
is an
resolution
active,
can happen in September, that would work.
this is an active farm where pesticide application is happening as we speak, and you guys are trying to stop that and transition it over to a pesticide-free environment in 3 years.
That's correct. That's correct. An incidental outcome of this entire project is to reduce chemical application for these 20 acres
That's helpful.
entirely forever. Yeah.
So look, Samantha, I'll give you, but we've got to solve this. Otherwise, just randomly agenda dockets have 3 or 4 of these questions. And we're going to stall a significant part of our land restoration if we as a board don't figure this out. So September would have to happen. And it sounds like if it could happen, it may also then give time for these individual projects to proceed, assuming we solve them.
For what it's worth, I still want to wait till September, but this seems different to me than a restoration effort where you got the ecosystem and you go in and you use glyphosate intentionally to try to treat the invasive. If this is a working farm and the practice is to be applying glyphosate sort of regularly, and you're trying to wean them off of that for 3 years, like I understand what they're saying. I still want to hear from all the experts on both sides, but this seems a little different to me.
Well, my understanding was this is a low pesticide use farm, isn't it?
No, River Garden Farms is conventional.
Oh, okay.
Samantha?
Yes, well, the pressure's a bit off of me because regardless of what I think we have 2 of 4 board members who'd like to wait to September. And, you know, I think that matters a lot, right? We have some fairly impassioned discussion happening up here. And so I think the right thing to do is to push it to September and wait for that. I think it is noteworthy, you know, it took us a while to get here, but with or without our decision, the pesticides are being applied, right? This is a chance to curb that and retire it for the future. However, right now it's happening, but without the WCB endorsement sort of stamp of approval and without our funding. So I can see that distinction too. You know, I'm new, as I mentioned, this can't be the first time that we've approved a project using herbicides, using glyphosate. I'm assuming it is not. So maybe we have been just approving these on an ad hoc basis. I agree with Director Bonham. You know, we need a plan, right? We need something more comprehensive. We need something more proactive. I don't know if it's a decision tree, probably not going to come up with that by September. But I think long-term that is what we need because we see lots of projects like this, I suspect, that come before us over the course of the work we do. So for now, happy to, you know, offline, I'm assuming, find a time in September that we can meet and take this up again when we can get a little bit more information from a broader group of scientists with diverse areas of expertise and background on this issue.
All right, so hearing everybody, I don't know if this is motion space. I mean, what I hear is as to agenda item 20, this is not about, you know, the merits of the overall project. It's, we'd like to postpone deciding, you know, basically 1 month, bring the agenda item back in a month in conjunction with a several hour, you know, discussion space on the substantive issue. In the intervening month, we'd ask the applicant to crunch some of the numbers that have come up in the discussion. And any other information you want to offer us to the pros and cons, because it's a pro and con kind of decision ultimately. Can we just not act on the item, or do you need a motion that captures what I just said in order to move to September?
And if I could just mention, even if we do need a motion, we probably want to take public comment first, right?
All eyes are on you, Colin.
Yeah, I would just move to defer to September.
Yeah. Yeah, reference the record in the discussion for guidance. Okay, any public comment? Knowing we've had a fair amount of comment over back and forth already. People, I think, in the public have a sense of where this is headed on the agenda item.
Anybody online, Celeste?
There are no raised hands.
Okay,
Right.
motion to defer, you know, kind of acknowledging the discussion in the record.
Second.
So did you make that motion?
I did.
Okay.
It was, you didn't catch the inflection, it was a question mark, but we'll take it as a motion. It's gathering seconds, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So
that brings us to item 21, and it's the same issue.
So look, I don't want to cut off an applicant or staff, but are we going to have the same conversation?
I think it's fundamentally the same issue for 2021.
All right, this is unusual.
And in there, again, like the previous applicant in their application, I think they filled out the herbicide questionnaire. And if I remember correctly, there was a reference to what it would take to do it more mechanically.
The pleasure, I don't really want us to have the same, go over the same discussion again for this particular item. What I would recommend is that understand if the board would like to hear the project, of a presentation on the project. And then what I would recommend based on the previous discussion and the discussion that potentially would occur for this particular project is that we just defer this one to September as well and have that motion.
Would you like to hear the presentation or just?
Yeah.
Again, no, it's not a disparaging of the applicants in the process.
Let's hear the presentation.
Just one clarifying question. Is this seems a little different. It's not like an active farm. I guess, are there herbicides being applied currently?
There are some substantial differences. That's right. And our grantee representative could help address those. One of the important ones is that the WCB grant itself wouldn't be funding any of the herbicide applications. Conservation partners associated with the project would be applying targeted herbicide before and after implementation. This is part of public lands, so Yosemite National Park and Stanislaus National Forest. So there is very limited use of herbicide and thoughtful use of herbicide in this context. And whether it's applied on this particular property, I wouldn't want to guess, but.
Are we the responsible CEQA party in this one?
Hold on. If we're gonna go to the agenda item,
Yeah.
let's have the presentation.
Okay.
Is that a pleasure?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, go for it, John.
Go, Judah.
Okay, thank you, members of the board and John. Ackerson Meadow Restoration, this proposal is to consider the allocation for a grant to American Rivers for a cooperative project with the U.S. Forest Service, National Park Service, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, CAL FIRE, Bonneville Environmental Foundation, and the Yosemite Conservancy to enhance 230 acres of meadow habitat in the Tuolumne River watershed, approximately 12 miles north of El Portal in Tuolumne County. This location map, again, we can see the project site indicated by the red dot. The polygon in the inset map, the red polygon indicates the outline for the project area. And it's comprised of Central Ackerson, which is the northern portion, and South Ackerson, which is conveniently to the south. And in combination, we refer to those as the Ackerson Meadow Complex. They're joined near the confluence between the channel through Ackerson, Central Ackerson and Ackerson South. Next slide. Ackerson Meadow is one of the largest low elevation meadows in the Sierra Nevada, and it's an important wildlife corridor in this area. It's entirely in public ownership. It's owned both by Yosemite National Park and Stanislaus National Forest, as I mentioned. Next slide. Ackerson has a history of grazing and hay production and associated activities like road building, irrigation improvements and ditching. And those actions have impacted the hydrologic function of the meadow, which result in a couple obvious impairments, including the cut slope that we see here. This is downstream of the confluence between the Central Ackerson and South Ackerson channels. And you can also see the encroaching conifers. So this should be a red flag to us that a wet meadow would not have upland species like these conifers in a well-functioning system. And that incised channel is associated with a cascade of factors. Next slide. So those there's also a remnant habitat on site. So this is an example of a healthy meadow that can serve as our target condition or reference site for our restoration activities on site. Next slide. So I referred to some of the cascade of conditions associated with impaired meadow function. That includes decreased groundwater recharge, drier soil conditions, and loss of wet meadow habitat. This is an example of some of the incised channel in Central Ackerson. Next slide. The channel incision in the Ackerson Meadow Complex is really significant in areas. It's 15 feet deep and 150 feet wide. So that's huge. And functionally, it disconnects channel flows from the meadow floodplain in all but the most extreme conditions. So we're talking about like a 500-year event. So 1 in 500 chance of happening any given year where the water in the channel would actually inundate the historic meadow floodplain. Project activities to restore the system include filling the channel and installing a robust grade control structure downstream to stabilize the system. And the excerpt from the design drawings on the left shows that grade control structure. Next slide. There's also a very thoughtful monitoring program associated with this project that will look at vegetation, wildlife, groundwater, and geomorphology. And these are some excerpts from that monitoring plan. Next slide. So that's the project in a nutshell, and the staff does recommend the project as proposed. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions. And in the audience today, we have from the applicant, Matt Freitas, Associate Director of Headwaters Conservation at American Rivers.
Thank you, Judah. All right, any board member comments or any questions on the specific information that Judah?
I've confused 21 with 25 in the sense that this is the herbicide questionnaire that came in kind of late. I didn't get the sense when I read this questionnaire that there was any serious attempt to look at alternatives to using pesticides. And the expectation was that if you followed what the standard protocol is in national parks, everything would be copacetic. Following the CA, the Yosemite Invasive Plant Program only uses 6 herbicides, of which glyphosate is one. And you'll be applying it in spring and late summer, which seems like prime time for breeding birds and things like that. I think this is one that we ought to save to make a decision on for sure until after we've had a presentation.
Any other board member comments? So does anybody want to make a motion to, or is there any public comment on this particular item? Sorry.
I think Matt would like to address the board.
Thanks, Judah. It's good afternoon now. I'm Matt Freitas. I'm the Associate Director of Headwaters Conservation at American Rivers. I'm the project manager for American Rivers for Ackerson Meadow Restoration Project from American Rivers. I'm joined by Tim Kuhn from the National Park Service, who's my co-project manager. I want to start off by just acknowledging you and your support of this project. You guys were one of the key project funders for the planning of the Ackerson Meadow Restoration Project, along with several others. So thank you. You guys have been critical in getting us to where we are now, and we hope will be critical in getting us through implementation as well. What's in front of you today is for the first phase of Ackerson Meadow Restoration Project, which is worth clarifying. Because of the size of this project, it will be, as far as we know, I'm just going to drop my mask, excuse me. As far as we know, this will be the largest full fill, so gully fill meadow restoration project in the Sierra Nevada ever attempted. So due to the size of the earthwork required, we are splitting it into 2 phases. It's just for the downstream half. I can address some of the questions about glyphosate use. I'm not the expert on this, and so if there's an opportunity for us to provide more information or revised questionnaire responses, we would take that. As you mentioned, Chairperson Catherine Phillips, we have 6 herbicides approved for the use in Yosemite National Park. The aquatic formulation of glyphosate is the only one that's glyphosate based. We have looked at, and I should say, glyphosate is only planned for use on a single species, Holcus linatus velvet grass in Ackerson Meadow. The concern with velvet grass is that if we don't get an effective level of control on it before the project, and then during the initial phases of recovery, that it does form monocultures in wet meadows. Probably the degraded hydrology is keeping it in check a little bit at the moment, and it does currently exist in monocultures in some places, and then in dispersed kind of throughout the existing native vegetation on site. So Yosemite does have ongoing invasive species work at Ackerson. And they do use, where feasible, they do use non-herbicide based methods. Mowing and vacuuming of the seed heads is one of those. Post-project, that presents some logistical challenges because we're filling a gully, right? So a creek that is 15 feet down currently is now going to be distributed across this 230 acre meadow. So getting a tractor in to mow is impractical and would be counterproductive to the objectives of the project. Also, mowing, say we had an upland, kind of patch, mowing in those would mean the loss of any native species that are existing there too. Tarping is the other option that we have looked at. But then there's the kind of microplastic trash and questions about the legacy of that with endangered species on site. We also lose native biodiversity in the process of doing that. There is, as I mentioned, the only species that we're planning to use glyphosate on is velvet grass. There is a single alternative that's been approved for use in the park, imazapyr. Which is a pre and post emergent but non-selective herbicide. It has a far longer, as I understand, a far longer residence time, and we have to have native revegetation. So we would have to wait a year after any application of that herbicide, which is the only one that would be effective and approved. We'd have to wait a year to revegetate, which in a full-fill meadow restoration project, we need to revegetate immediately. The meadow revegetation is our long-term erosion control strategy. And the loss of that is what contributed to the initial degradation of the meadow. So we have considered other alternatives. The park has done their due diligence on that, and I'm sorry if our responses to the questionnaire didn't fully capture that, and we can provide that additional documentation if it's possible. But there's a cost element, right? That maybe non-mechanical means would be more costly, but there's also that they might also just be counterproductive to the goals of our project. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. And if there's any other questions about the project, I'm happy to answer them.
Look, I would just observe, Mike, that's a great description, but it also just illustrates, this is a space of choices, and we've got to think about how we're going to navigate the board through that.
Would it, I'm sorry.
Go ahead if you have.
Would it be helpful for me to provide the context within the Prop 68 solicitation?
No, I don't think at this point. Thank you, though, Judah.
Mike, if you were also carried to September.
I can't hear you.
Yep. If you were carried to September, and I'm comfortable with the project for what it's worth, but if you were carried to September and assume you got a green light, could you still hit your scheduling that you need? Please.
By September 30th, we would be fine. If it were pushed later than that, due to the size of the project, we need to release the RFP for construction, which is scheduled to start till August of next year. We need to release that this year. So any later than that would push it a year. That would have implications for our overall funding strategy for the project. You guys are a key, but kind of just one key piece, but one piece of the funding strategy that includes, I think, 19 funding sources right now to fund both phase 1 and phase 2, both state and federal and foundation sources.
All right, thank you.
So I think I'd start by just saying, did anyone, I mean, I'm persuaded, but we work on majorities. So maybe something you heard is distinguishable from agenda item 20. And if not, it seems like we're in kind of move to defer space.
How's the board feeling? I mean, I need some.
Yeah, I think I'd prefer to hold till September to consider these as a whole after we've heard from experts. I will say that, you know, I'm starting to see glyphosate as a measure of last resort, you know, very, very, very last resort after you've exhausted all other potential options. It sounds like you've considered mechanical and there are real drawbacks for that. You've considered these alternative herbicides and there are problems with all of that. Just, I guess, urge you to really, you know, convince us that you've pursued every other angle. I think that's what these questionnaires are for. So we appreciate that information. And there isn't the factor of the last one with the sort of active farm, but you know, I would have real trouble holding back a project that would restore such an important ecological area. If you've explored all the other options, there's no other way to do it. That would be troubling for me, but I would still prefer to wait till September.
Thank you. Samantha, you want?
Yeah, I agree. I think we take them together, and we bump for a month. I mean, yeah, it's always going to depend on the facts of the case, right? These are always going to be case by case. And I do think the herbicide questionnaire gives us components that could be used in something like a decision tree. And again, I don't pretend to think that we're going to have that by September necessarily, but I think that's probably where we need to go is take some of the elements from that form and, you know, have you considered other mechanical means? Is this application of last resort? Are these pesticides already being used? Is this project intended to allow that use to retire permanently? You know, these are all important factors to consider. And I just think we need a way to sort of consider them in a more systematic way versus just ad hoc, knowing that it is always going to be case by case and dependent on the facts of the case. But for today, I think it makes all the sense in the world to set this over to September 2.
So our commitment to the public here is we're going to do this in September. And with that, I'd make a motion to defer agenda item 21 based on the discussion.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, so that'll bring us to, as I indicated before we started, item 21, item number 25, the Escondido Creek Repairing and Restoration Project. Kara Allen on our staff will give you a quick presentation. And I just want folks to pay attention to the time. We're about 12:30 right now, and so we need to continue on. So Kara, please.
Okay, thank you, John. Agenda item 25 is a proposal to consider a grant to Nature Collective, formerly known as the San Elijo Lagoon Conservancy, for a multi-benefit watershed enhancement and restoration project that will benefit 98 acres of habitat for climate resiliency and several sensitive species in San Diego County. The project area is within the Escondido Creek watershed that drains into the Department San Elijo Lagoon Ecological Reserve and includes 3 different sites, 2 that are part of the Ecological Reserve and owned and managed by Nature Collective. And the 3rd most inland site is owned by the county and is part of their Escondido Creek Preserve. The project area is part of the Multiple Habitat Conservation Program that is a driving force of the conservation and restoration happening in this part of the county, and has identified the project area as having the potential to provide high quality habitat value and also as a biological core and linkage area for the covered species under that plan. Next slide, please. So this map shows where Nature Collective has done some similar work in the county. with funding from WCB, and that the proposed project that is shown in red at the bottom will actually be complementing and expanding their previous work to connect high quality habitat and to stop the spread of several noxious invasive plants. Next slide. So the next few slides present the need for this project. The pictures here are of the most coastal site and show disturbed woodland, riparian, and marsh habitat that are dominated by non-native plants, including 3 acres of eucalyptus, over 5 acres of palm species and shrubs that are in the creek corridor, and dense patches of annual forbs that are suppressing our native forbs and limiting the availability of food resources that wildlife and invertebrates need, especially when adjusting to climate change. And I do want to point out that in the foreground of the bottom right picture is an example of native marsh habitat that naturally recolonized after this area was treated by Nature Collective using chemical, and demonstrates what can be expected at most of these sites once the non-native forbs are controlled. Next slide, please. These pictures are of the second site within the San Elijo Reserve, which consists of riparian woodland and scrub habitat. Eucalyptus covers approximately 1 acre of this site, and about 18 mature palms that are over 30 feet tall have been counted here, but there are hundreds more that are under 10 feet tall, as you can see in the top left picture. There's also about 7 acres of this 20-acre site that are dominated by non-native grasses and forbs that degrade habitat for our resident and migratory birds, including least-bell's vireo. Last year, our Pacific Flyway program provided funds to restore riparian woodland immediately downstream of this site. And if selected for funding, this project will link over 95 acres of restored riparian woodland, freshwater marsh, riparian scrub, and alkaline marsh. Next slide, please. And finally, these pictures are of the most inland site on county land that has been the subject of several past disturbances, including being a man-made lake in the 70s, followed by a eucalyptus plantation for firewood production, and is now a culmination and source of our most invasive plants that account for approximately 20 acres of the 70-acre site and increase fire threat, impede stream flow and wildlife movement, and significantly reduce habitat value of this important wildlife corridor. Next slide. So the first step in addressing these site conditions is to know what you are treating and where, which Nature Collective has already done for each site and is shown on these maps. And as part of the proposed project, Nature Collective will be developing an environmental monitoring program that tiers off the monitoring that they do for the San Elijo Lagoon for vegetation, birds, and reptiles. And for this project, they will also monitor changes in the insect population with an emphasis on when herbicides are used to better understand the effects of restoration efforts on our pollinator community. Next slide, please. And when treating these invasive plants, an integrated pest management approach will be used that includes significant tree felling, manual removal using hand and power tools, as well as chemical application. Knowing there is concern around the use of glyphosate, this product is only proposed for use on palms, mainly as a paint or squirt application. And measures will be taken when using all chemicals to use the least amount possible and to time the application when pollinators and other sensitive resources are not present. Next slide. And after the sites have been treated for at least 2 years, active planting will occur that targets native riparian trees and species that can withstand periods of drought and that are known to provide a variety of resources year-round that these non-native plants are not doing. Next slide, please. And so by the end of the grant, 98 acres of habitat will not only be enhanced, but protected through the removal of over 30 acres of invasive plants that are creating fire and flood hazards, outcompeting our native plants, and degrading habitat for several vulnerable taxonomic groups. Next slide, please. And on top of all that enhancement, 19 acres will be actively planted and maintained to restore native dominance in our plant communities and to provide resilience in a changing climate so wildlife have the resources they need throughout the year for feeding, movement, and breeding. Next slide. And this project will provide many other ecosystem benefits that are listed here. But just as important is the level of monitoring that this project is going to provide that can yield objective, accurate, and defensible information for conservation management actions and their effects on different trophic levels, including insects. And joining us today is Nature Collective's Executive Director, Doug Gibson, and Operations Director, Bradley Nussbaum, to help answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Kara. Any board member comments or questions on the presentation?
I have a question. So the glyphosate in this case won't necessarily be sprayed. You're talking about painting. So that basically what you do is you cut down the palm tree and then you apply it like with a paintbrush, literally.
Yeah, there was a picture that showed
Yeah.
that method.
Yeah. And you said painting or spraying. I mean, what makes the difference?
Or squirting.
Or
So
squirting.
they'll drill a hole and squirt the product inside the.
So the likelihood of it getting into the soil or into or exposing mosquitoes or anything else to it is
Very minimal.
very minimal. And the paint, when you paint it on the stump, how quickly does that dry? I mean, are folks out there sort of semi-monitoring it until it dries or?
Absolutely. Yeah. Nature Collective is a very responsible organization in the work that they do, especially when using chemicals. Doug Gibson is, I believe, should be on Zoom, and he's definitely an expert when it comes to integrated pest management practices as well as herbicide use, and he could provide more information on that question.
Because if you're painting it as opposed to spraying it, the likelihood of having systemic impacts, meaning the ecosystem impacts, is almost nothing, right? Because you're only.
Yeah, because you're limiting the amount of drift and where that chemical can actually, where it will go.
And then what it does is essentially goes into the plant and does it kill the root system? Is that what happens?
Yes.
And then is it transferred at all to the soil system, or is it just?
In what I've learned, the glyphosate actually has the least amount of residual matter.
So it doesn't go into the soil system when it's absorbed by the roots through painting?
I don't think we're qualified to answer the kinds of questions that you're asking, Catherine. I mean, we know what
Well,
the,
because I'd like to
applicant
get to a
tells
point
us.
where we can approve this project, because I'm less concerned about a painting situation of some palm trees than I am about spraying.
Let's- yeah.
Field the questions.
Doug, Doug Gibson, are you online? Can you come in? And we had a couple of questions from board members that.
Doug, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Okay, hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yes, great question. So one, we sort of, after last August, we sort of heard the direction of the board, and we helped CalEPSI in working with this questionnaire and really outlining integrated pest management, because I think it is really important to go through the species and how you go about this. So what we did is we tried to eliminate any type of foliar spraying to the maximum amount. And so cutting and painting is literally like painting a layer of paint on your wall. And so that's the amount of herbicide going in. So by the time it gets translocated down to the root systems and breaks down, the residual is going to be small. I'm not going to say that there's nothing, but again, it's a very small amount that you're painting around the cambium of the tree to stop the growth of that tree. So we went through our species, which are very hard target species to remove, like mechanically, you have to, do a stream bed alteration, dig up the whole area. So to avoid those types of impacts, we went through to do the least amount possible and still have the type of effects that we've had on 5 other WCB grants, which is restoring these sensitive habitats and helping not only CDFW, but U.S. Fish and Wildlife in their recovery plans for sensitive and endangered species.
So again, the only use of glyphosate on this project will be painting stumps.
Yes, only that, and like drilling, like Cara mentioned, sometimes we drill a hole in it and spray it inside there. But it's contained within the plant itself.
And then another question that's more for you, John. What does it mean when we're a CEQA responsible party versus a lead agency? What does that responsibility? Yeah.
Colin, I can explain it, but Colin would probably be better to explain it.
Right. The CEQA lead agency has different legal responsibilities under CEQA. They're the ones that are initially tasked with determining the appropriate level of environmental review. So for example, on this project, the lead agency was the County of San Diego, which would have been the first public agency to approve the project. Therefore, they become the lead agency. As part of their review, they opted to prepare a mitigated negative declaration, which is then certified and approved by the County Board of Supervisors. As a responsible agency, when there's already been lead agency review, as there is here legally, there's a presumption that the lead agency's environmental review is appropriate and complies with law. We then look at that environmental document, determine if everything looks good, and then we make our own findings, which you, the board, approve when you approve the project, documenting our CEQA compliance as well as a responsible agency.
Said in one sentence, the lead agency does the environmental document. The responsible agency determines whether it's going to use that document for its own decision.
Yes, well said.
You could be a lawyer.
All right. Thank you, Kara. Any other questions from board members? Any members of the public wishing to speak? Seeing none, so what's a pleasure? Should we defer this one, or you want to take make a motion on the recommended?
John, I do have a person online raising their hand. It's Andrew Rodriguez.
Okay, what was the name again? I'm sorry.
Andrew Rodriguez.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for letting me comment. And I also want to say thank you very much for this fascinating and marvelous lesson on representative democracy. This is my first time tuning into a Wildlife Conservation Board meeting. And I'm really impressed. Thank you for all the work you're doing. I appreciate your professionalism and the respect you're showing to each other and to the public. On this particular project, my partner and I have a home in the Val Sereno district. And the reason I checked opposed is only because there wasn't a box that I could check that said, I need more information. So and I've had more information in the past 24 hours. I spoke with Kara this morning. I really appreciate that help. And I've been talking to someone in the Nature Collective. But essentially, our home faces the setting sun, and it gets extremely hot in the summer months. And we rely on the shade provided by those tall eucalyptus trees. And we don't have to tax the grid because the shade will keep our home cool. I support the project. I believe in riparian restoration. I've actually volunteered with the Escondido Creek Conservancy to plant native species. But I'm wondering how much of tree removal does this project involve? I mentioned to Kara this morning, is this clear cutting? Or will this be selective removal of the eucalyptus trees? Because if they're all going to be removed close to our home, we are going to lose that shade. And it will be pretty unbearable in the summer months. We're going to have to turn on the air conditioning and get on the grid. And I'm only speaking for me and my partner, but there will be other
Okay.
neighbors who will be in the
Yeah.
same situation.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. I'll ask Kara, or if Doug wants to address the amount of trees that will be removed, eucalyptus.
Yes, so yeah, we've been speaking with a couple landowners around there, and our projects, we have a community engagement process where we have a meeting to really kick off, get concerns, and really adapt the project. So it won't be a clear cut. We will phase through removal, and maybe a fourth, because it's a 4-year project. We can move that way and get other plants and natives growing so we can start replacing that canopy. We're not going to be able to replace like the entire canopy of eucalyptus, but we will get sycamores that can get up to a fairly high level. And so working with the community, since we have a 25-year obligation on these grants, it is really important and essential to us to have this long-term relationship.
Thank you, Doug. All right, any other questions? So what's the board's pleasure?
Well, I think it might hinge on one.
Well, no, I'm comfortable moving forward and voting on this one.
All right, somebody want to make a motion on the staff's recommendation in the agenda?
I'll move.
Catherine? Second?
I'll make a second.
Great, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great, motion passes. Thank you.
So here's also what we're gonna do for like housekeeping. We're gonna carry the agenda item 26 executive session over to September as well. We've got to give sufficient space to the remaining agenda items and then get ourselves over to a birthday party. And council tells us the executive session item can wait till September. Thank you.
Great.
All right. I don't think we have glyphosate in any of the remaining projects. Awesome.
So that brings us back to item 22 in the agenda, which is the Sequoia Grove Restoration Project. Judah Grossman on our staff will present the board the project.
All right, moving right along. This proposal is to consider the allocation for a grant to the Great Basin Institute for a cooperative project with the National Park Service and Sequoia Park Conservancy to enhance 1,076 acres of mixed conifer forest in Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks, approximately 50 miles east of Fresno in Tulare County. Here again, the location map shows the different work sites, which is distributed across several areas within Sequoia and Kings Canyon National Parks. Next slide, please. This is a real pleasure to talk about this project because these beautiful, iconic giant sequoias are, well, they're very special. They're endemic to the western slope of the Sierra Nevada, and this particular area hosts over a third of the geographic range for this species. Next slide. Unfortunately, an increasingly common view in this area is also these extreme wildfire events that killed even the largest of those giant sequoias. And this is a photo of in 2022 of the 2021 KNP burn scar. Next slide. This is a map showing the extent of different burn areas in 2020 and 2021. Those burn scars or burn areas are shown as orange and red polygons. The dark green polygons you can also see overlaying that are giant sequoia groves, and you can see the extent of the overlap between those burn areas and those giant sequoia groves. 59% of the area occupied by giant sequoia groves has burned since 2017. And over 14,000 giant sequoia individuals have died as well. Next slide. So the conditions, the new conditions or current conditions that support these extreme fire events include overcrowding. And so we have drought and climate change and fire suppression, which has developed or resulted in a buildup of hazardous fire fuels. So we have these extreme fire events that lead to degraded soil quality, of course, loss of vegetation and impaired water quality. Next slide. This project entails restoring burned areas, so restoring sequoia groves in burned and previously burned areas, and also reducing hazardous fuels in select forests to support ongoing maintenance of those areas using prescribed fire. Next slide. This is an example of a treated forest. So this would support prescribed fire in a controlled manner. And this is the target condition for those thinning treatments. Next slide. So staff recommends the project as proposed. And on the line today, we have Jerry Kerr, Chief Executive Officer with the Great Basin Institute.
Thank you, Judah. Any board member questions or comments? Any members of the public wishing to speak?
Just a general question. What does restoration mean for, like, what kinds of activities is that?
Yeah, so restoration, it's an interesting term. We generally use it to refer to restoration of natural processes, or a more inclusive term might be enhancement of ecosystem services. So in this case, when we talk about forest restoration, it can include a whole suite of things that improve that forest health and forest function. Frankly, I forget how I use it in this context. I can be more specific if you like.
Yeah, it's pretty controversial. I mean, among, you know, that among forest enviros, at least, about how much thinning do you do? What do you remove, et cetera, et cetera. So that does become a bit of an issue. What kind of trees are going to be removed? You're going in and you're thinning in existing groves, not in the burned areas. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're not doing post-fire salvaging. You're going in and thinning.
That's right.
And then what you're thinning, what you're pulling out, what are you pulling out?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we were aware that this might come up in advance. So I'm going to defer to Jerry on the line. So Celeste, if you can allow Jerry to call in.
We are looking for Jerry at the moment. 1 second. There is no Jerry on the line.
Okay. I can take my best guess. In general, thinning, so when I've gone through a forest that's been marked for selective thinning, they're not targeting a single species. It is relative to the abundance of the trees there. They may try and skew the community composition to favor certain less common, or in this case, giant sequoia individuals. But in general, they thin the smaller or what appear to be failing trees. So something that's diseased, something that's lost its apical meristem, something that's too crowded with another individual. So I would say it's safe to say that they're going to thin across several species in the mixed conifer forest, and the composition of those, you know, I wouldn't hazard a guess.
Yeah, because some trees intentionally, you know, the sequoia has that mother tree with all those little baby trees around it. And you see that when you go out hiking in sequoia forest. So I'm assuming they're not going to be thinning the baby trees.
I wouldn't, frankly, I often they'll thin to the most dominant few of those with the hope of having one or few established strongly, as opposed to many competing with each other and then developing louder fuels.
Yeah.
Yeah, can I comment on that though? My understanding of that is that they will be taking out a few of those kinds of trees, Catherine, but it's actually to let the trees breathe and actually enhance the growth of those trees. So that in order for the tree to grow the way they anticipated to grow, they will need to take out, you know, if there's 20 little trees on a stump, they're going to take out some of those little trees in order to help the tree grow. And we've done that up on the North Coast, and a lot of the forest restoration projects that we've done up on Mill Creek Smith River drainage, those areas where there's a significant amount of redwoods and
San Vicente redwood.
San Vicente is the same way. But it's really for the goal is to achieve the overall increase in ecological health of the forest system out there. And by removing some of those smaller trees and some of the forest slash, you'll get there much quicker.
Well, we're not the experts here. Has anyone filed any opposition comments?
Pardon me.
Okay.
missed the question.
No opposition comments.
No
opposition.
opposition. No.
And it's a pretty diverse listed set of
Supporters, yeah.
Including, tribal representatives.
Okay, thanks.
You good? Okay. All right. Any members of the public? All right. Hearing none, do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the projects as proposed.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Judah. Thank you. All right. This brings us to item 23, the Camino Cielo Bridge Replacement Final Design Project down in Ventura County. Don Crocker on our staff will briefly present the project to you.
Great, thank you, John. This proposal is to consider the allocation for a grant to the Ventura County Watershed Protection District for a cooperative project with the California State Coastal Conservancy to complete final designs for a new bridge across the Ventura River that will be an essential component of the Matilah Dam Ecosystem Restoration Project in Ventura County. Next slide, please. The picture here on the left is Matilah Dam. It's about 16 miles from the Pacific Ocean and about a half a mile from where Matilah Creek joins the Ventura River. It was constructed in 1947 to pound a volume of 7,000 acre feet. It was intended for water supply, flood protection, and recreational use. Unfortunately, it's also a complete fish passage barrier, and it blocks some of the best southern steelhead spawning habitat in the watershed. And as the dam prevents fish from moving upstream, it also traps sediment moving downstream. This deprives downstream floodplains, the Ventura River estuary, and adjacent coastal areas of much needed sand and cobble. The trapped sediment is accumulated to the point that Matilah Reservoir has lost approximately 98% of its original capacity and now impounds less than 150 acre feet. The picture here on the right was taken standing on the dam, and it should be the deepest part of the reservoir. But you can see that it's characterized by emergent vegetation, which is typical shallow water habitat. And right now, it really only impounds up to around 6 feet of water. The depth is 6 feet at its highest. So the dam is basically have virtual no function at this point in time. Making matters worse is the dam is known to be deteriorating from alkali silica reaction, which may eventually compromise its structural ability. Next slide, please. So with the dam decaying and not providing any benefits, focus has come to turn to removing it to restore access to the historical spawning grounds of the federally endangered southern steelhead. Because of this, Matilah Dam removal has been identified by the National Marine Fisheries Service as a priority recovery action for southern steelhead. And the dam is also listed in the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's Fish Passage Priority List. And beyond steelhead, restoring the natural hydrology will benefit many sensitive riparian and terrestrial species in the watershed, while increasing the sediment transportation that is vital to downstream estuary and beaches. Next slide, please. Once the dam is removed, the current hydrology of the Ventura River will be altered in ways that could negatively impact downstream residential and agricultural activities. To prevent this, the Matilah Dam Ecosystem Restoration Project, or MDERP, has identified 6 downstream infrastructure components that need to be completed before Matilah Dam can be removed. The WCB approved a grant for $5.2 million in May 2020 to provide the final designs for removal of the dam and for the modification of 3 of the 6 downstream components. 2 others are being funded by the State Coastal Conservancy and CDFW. That leaves only the 6th downstream project without funding, replacement of the bridge where Camino Cielo Drive crosses the Ventura River. When the first grant was given in 2020, the WCB did not have funding available to include Camino Cielo Bridge along with the other 3 downstream components. New funding sources have come to the WCB since then, and approving this grant will allow us to fund work that would have ideally been included in the previous grant. So this project will complete the preliminary designs, final designs, and environmental review necessary to replace the box culvert bridge you can see here with a spanning bridge that will not impair steelhead migration or sediment transport. while being capable of withstanding any high flow events that result from the newly restored hydrology. Next slide, please. The primary benefit of this project is it allows the larger Matilaha Dam removal project to proceed. When that happens and all 6 downstream infrastructure components are complete, the removal of the dam will restore access to over 17 miles of high-quality southern steelhead spawning and rearing habitat, allow for the restoration of over 2,000 acres of varied riparian habitats, restart the natural transport of sediments that will support downstream habitat as well as wetland and nearshore habitats near the Ventura River Delta. And beyond the ecological benefits, the new Camino Cielo Bridge will improve public safety by improving access for emergency responders in the event of a severe flood. Therefore, staff recommends that the Wildlife Conservation Board approve this project as proposed. In the audience are Kirk Norman, Dave Fleisch, Matt Arrett, and David Yardis from Ventura County Government. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Don. Any board member questions or comments?
If there's one part of kind of the broad environmental space I'm most comfortable in, it's in dam removal. And look, not all dams are good candidates for removal. And having worked on this kind of nationally for a long time, some of the ingredients that illustrate it's the right thing to do are local support, local government involvement, extensive planning, just everything that's emblematic of this project. And this is a precondition to the long-term vision. So we're already in as a board a fair amount. And I personally think we should see the journey through.
Thanks, Chuck. Just one quick question. Sounds like a great project. I'm curious about public access for along the bridge. Is that part of this project, or is it going to be considered in the future? Is there a process for getting public comment
I
on?
think that is, we'll have someone come up from the grantee, but I do think that, it's going to be an improvement. It's going to be wider and there's going to be space for a shoulder, but the structure of that shoulder and what it looks like, I don't believe it's been decided yet. So Kurt, you want to come up?
Chair of the board, Bonham, Director Donnelly, and members of the board, I'll answer the question in just a moment. Did want to express thanks to your board for considering this grant and the work that Don has put into preparing this presentation and his accessibility and help during the our preparations. So with that said.
And remind us your name and who you're with. Oh, okay, right.
Oh,
You said that.
thank you.
Good.
Yes. My name's Kirk Norman. I'm the project manager with the Ventura County Watershed Protection District for the Matilaha Dam project. The bridge is the replacement. The existing bridge is a box culvert. You may have seen pictures of it. It's a low-level crossing. It's going to be replaced with a prefabricated bridge that will span about 180 feet of the creek. It's 16 feet wide and it has 12 feet for vehicle access and 12 feet for vehicle access, 4 feet for pedestrian access. It's a pedestrian refuge.
Cool.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Right. Any other board member comments or questions?
I was just going to say, except for the anticipated truck traffic because of Matilaha, it's not a heavily traveled bridge, is it?
That's correct.
Okay.
There's 6 properties that the bridge serves on the other side of the creek.
Is that area used for like hiking? Is it a popular sort of area for the public to access?
Matilaha Creek is a popular area for public access. In past years, the State Coastal Conservancy provided funding for the acquisition of the Hot Springs area, which has been a long time public amenity on the creek. And so that's a location that would facilitate public access a lot more than this bridge replacement.
And doesn't it cross there's a bike trail from the city of Ventura up to Ojai? Doesn't that cross that area? Or is that just next to it? Used to live there.
Great, thank you. All right, any other members from the public wishing to speak? Any hands raised, Celeste? Supervisor?
We have no raised hands.
Yes, we're afternoon now, so good afternoon, honorable members of the board. Primarily, I just want to be here today to thank WCB staff for all of their work in getting us here today. As you heard, this project is part of an overall much larger ecosystem restoration project, which is going to do wonders for the Ventura River watershed and our coastal areas, right where the river hits the beach. And we've made real progress over the last couple of years, largely because of our many state funding partners, DFW, the Wild Year Board, the Coastal Conservancy, also RLF and Patagonia. There's been this stakeholders group that's been working so well together over the last few years, working towards this much larger project. And we've made more progress in the last 5 years than we have in the 25 previously. And so we're getting really close, and this design is going to be a real critical feature of the overall project. So I'd really appreciate your consideration of
And
today's
can I-
item.
Mr. Supervisor, can I ask you to state your name?
I'm
Just for
sorry.
that? That's fine, but I want you to get on record.
I always forget that. It's funny. My name is Matt Lavier. I'm the supervisor in the first district in Ventura County, and this whole the whole project is in my supervisorial district.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, seeing no other public comments, is there a motion?
Yeah, I move that we approve as proposed.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great, motion carries. Thank you. So moving on to the last item in the agenda. Item number 24, this is State Route 91B Canyon Wildlife Crossing Planning Project. Don will also present the board the project. Don?
Thank you, John. This proposal is considered the allocation for a grant to the California Department of Transportation for a cooperative project with the Riverside County Transportation Commission to develop final designs for an upgrade to an existing concrete culvert underneath State Route 91 to benefit wildlife migration between Chino Hills State Park and the Santa Ana Mountains near the city of Corona in Riverside County. Next slide, please. Within the Santa Ana Mountains are over 350,000 acres of nearly contiguous wildlife habitat that straddle the border between Orange County to the west and Riverside County to the east. This is a mountainous area with deep valleys that has resisted conversion to the agricultural and urban uses that have caused so much habitat loss in flatter areas of Southern California. But the challenging topography can only offer so much protection, and the habitat within the Santa Ana Mountains is being degraded by the encroachment of urban development and road building. This prevents wildlife from using their traditional migration pathways and creates isolated patches of habitat that impair the free flow of genes between animal populations in the regions. One of the hardest hit species by this fragmentation is the mountain lion. Human-made barriers have restricted much of the lion population's ability to seek mates from outside their home ranges. This has led to widespread inbreeding, which is predicted to extirpate the species within the next 12 to 50 years, unless access to breeding habitat currently separated by artificial barriers is restored. One of the largest isolated habitat patches is in the Chino Hills to the north of the Santa Ana Mountains. Historically, the only separation of these areas came from the Santa Ana River, which was passable for most animal species. This all changed when State Route 91 was built to follow the river's course and later developed into a major transportation route between Orange and Riverside counties. Over the years, the freeway expanded to 8 lanes and is now a near total barrier to wildlife movement. This is problematic because while the Chino Hills are too small to support a mountain lions and other large species on its own, the hills are identified by the California Essential Habitat Connectivity Project as a natural landscape block that supports connections between the Santa Ana Mountains and the Eastern Peninsular Range. Reconnecting the Santa Anas and the Chino Hills is therefore vital to the mountain lion's future in the region. This has led to the barrier created by SR 91 being listed on CDFW's Wildlife Movement Barriers Priority List, which makes it one of the top wildlife connectivity priorities in the state. The project you are currently considered is located in an area along SR 91 known as B Canyon, where protected lands extend to the edge of both sides of the roadway and offers the most promising place to restore wildlife movement across SR 91. Next slide, please. The picture on the left here is SR 91, and I like this picture because you can see how the protected lands on both sides of the freeway are coming right up to the roadway. But you can also, unfortunately, you can also see how, you know, how many fast moving cars are on there. And, you know, it makes it, right now, the road's impossible for an animal to cross without being hit. There is a potential solution, however, in the form of a box culvert that comes, crosses under SR 91 at Bee Canyon. And the pictures on the right show this culvert. And while it's large enough to accommodate mountain lions and other large species, incremental freeway widening projects over the years has resulted in the culvert no longer running straight under SR 91. This has created a bend in the culvert, which you can kind of see in these pictures, that does not allow a direct line of sight from one side of the culvert to the other. This prevents the structure from being used as a wildlife corridor because most wild animals, especially the human-averse mountain lion, will not enter into a structure where they cannot see through to the other side. Next slide, please. And this is a conceptual design of what the culvert at Bee Canyon looks like right now. The structure currently follows the path shown in red, and you can see from that looking from one end to the other is just not possible. The solution is to modify the culvert so that it follows the course shown in green and allows for a direct line of sight. Next slide, please. These two pictures show how close protected habitat comes to SR 91 at Bee Canyon. The picture on the left was taken while looking south towards the Santa Anas and shows Bee Canyon extending to the edge of the roadway. The one on the right was taken while standing in Bee Canyon and looking north to the Chino Hills. At the bottom of the photo, you can see the culvert that will be modified. And you can also see the dense riparian vegetation just on the other side of the freeway that will provide cover for animals migrating to protected lands in the Chino Hills. Next slide, please. So the project you're considering today is to develop final designs for installing a new 12-foot box culvert that will provide a straight crossing with unobstructed sightlines under SR 91. When this is implemented, a mountain lion corridor will be developed that allows movement between Chino Hill State Park and the conservation lands within the Western Riverside County Multi-Species Conservation Plan. And while mountain lions are definitely the driver of this project, other sensitive species such as bobcats and mule deer will benefit as well. Therefore, staff recommends that the Wildlife Conservation Board approve this project as proposed. In the online audience is Scott Quinnell from Caltrans. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. All right, any board member comments or questions?
Just a quick comment. This is a fantastic project. Absolutely support it. I will say that the better approach probably would have been for Caltrans to have thought of this when they were doing the freeway expansion projects in the first place. So I hope that the attention to wildlife crossings and corridors, the Wallace-Annenberg, this project and many others gets their attention, that's something that they should be thinking about when they're doing their planning and construction projects. And if we can get that message across, that would be good.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right, and I don't want to go too far on it because I've only scanned it, but the new Senate Bill 2344 is going to require Caltrans to take a lot of these things into consideration with wildlife crossing. I hope that number's right. So they'll be putting together a list, and so they'll be developing priorities. So you're right, what we're doing is undoing stuff we did 50 to 75 years ago. And hopefully going forward, we won't be making these same mistakes, but we still have to correct what's there now.
Do we have assurance Caltrans isn't going to go in and bend the culvert again? I mean, is that part of the deal with Caltrans?
Well, we do because we could, they have a 25-year period on this project. So we've got that guarantee. And then and I just don't think they will, to be honest with you. I know it's maybe naive, but I don't think they will. So.
And actually, just to remind the board, this is the final plan. This is the planning project that will design the final product or project. So
just a note of context, the new Caltrans director was Caltrans project lead for Liberty Canyon Wallace-Annenberg, so he understands wildlife crossings.
Quick question. So obviously the kinked culvert, there's human access. You can see that folks have been in there. There's some graffiti and stuff. Will that be, and this is me coming from a place of not having a lot of information on wildlife corridors generally, but will this also, will people be able to access it? And does that matter in terms of it being used by wildlife? Do you have to worry about people hanging out in there or sleeping there or anything like that?
Right. So I've been on the site. I was just there a couple months ago. I didn't see any sort of sign of people living there. There was a little bit of graffiti, but in an urban area, it wasn't extensive, to be honest with you. So yes, there will be people there occasionally. I don't think it's going to be to the extent that it will be a diversion. And I do think that if these people are doing graffiti, see a mountain lion coming down the other end of the culvert, they might leave instead of the lion. So, but I don't think that that's going to be too large of a problem with this site, because there's just not a lot. If you go back to that first map I showed, you can see that there's sort of urban areas. I think Director Bonham referred to them as sort of a figure eight. You've got the classic sort of a large patch and small patch. But this crossing is an area where it's really steep and there's just not a lot, let me see. Yeah, so basically there's not a lot of urbanization immediately around the project. So there was some tagging and there was some art, but it didn't seem excessive to me, to be honest with you.
Gotcha. That makes sense. I live in San Diego, and I don't know if you've seen viral videos of folks getting a bit too close to sea lions lately, but I don't know if people do run away from mountain lions if they see them. I hope so. Yeah.
Don't run.
Don't run. Right. But
Great, thank you. All right.
John, can I just ask you a quick question?
Yes.
It seems like the canyon has a kind of natural funneling effect to lead to that culvert currently. Do you know if this project or potentially a future implementation would consider directional fencing to prevent wildlife from going onto the highway?
Yeah, no, fencing will most likely, it's not done yet, and fencing is probably not as critical as for an overpassing project, but yes, there will be work to, there's no point in doing this if no one shows up, you know what I mean? So we will work on making sure that the animals do find it.
All right, any public comment? All right, do I have a motion?
I'll move to approve the item as proposed.
I'll second.
Great, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you, Don. All right, that brings us to item 26, but the board, do we need a formal motion to defer this, Colin, or are we all right?
I think we're okay.
Okay, so we will bring back item 26 at a future meeting, and that concludes our agenda.
Anyone still left with us? The birthday is 75 years. President Truman was in office. Chuck Yogo broke the sound barrier. Jackie Robinson joined the Brooklyn Dodgers, and the Polaroid camera was introduced. So if you can't come over to the celebration, we're pretty stoked about the next 75 years. And that generation celebrating the 150th anniversary of the Wildlife Conservation Board. John, where are we headed?
We're headed to the Elks Tower, which is 2 blocks north of Capitol on 11th Street. 90, let me just get the directions real quick. Do you have them, Rebecca?
That's where we're headed. So while we get the directions sorted out.
What is it, Mary? 921 11th Street.
So with that, I'll bang the gavel. We'll see you in September for an interesting meeting.
Great, thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.